Dripping with sweat, a young man pants heavily in exhaustion. Outside, the heavy rain beats against the building as his ragged breathing echoes. He stares forward in utter shock, his eyes wide with sudden realization. As he takes in his surroundings, he realizes he is entirely trapped inside the very game world he always played. He reflects on his past life, remembering that he was once merely a player of this game. Looking at his reflection in the glass, the young man stares at his unfamiliar, overweight body in the pouring rain. Shocked by his appearance, he wonders why he wasn't granted some kind of fearsome cheat skill like typical reincarnated heroes. Instead of a powerful avatar, he screams internally in horror, wondering why he has been reborn as an overweight pig. His mind flashes back to the pixelated screens of his former life, remembering the vibrant world of his favorite video game. Back in his previous life, he sits alone in his room, hunched over his computer desk surrounded by anime figures. A small, tired smile graces his face as he stares intently at the glowing monitor. Glancing at the wall, he notes the time as the clock ticks past 5:30. Exhausted but determined, he firmly pushes himself up from his office desk. Without a second thought, he immediately begins packing up to leave the office. Bidding his coworkers a quick farewell, he swiftly departs for the day. Behind him, the office remains busy with the continuous clicking of keyboards as his peers work late. Meanwhile, his coworkers gossip behind his back, stunned that he actually went home exactly on time despite the heavy workload. They accurately assume his abrupt departure has everything to do with his unhealthy obsession with a video game. The gossiping colleagues express their surprise at seeing such a normally quiet guy act so desperate. They mock his intense dedication, failing to understand why he cares so much about what they consider a stupid game. Arriving safely at his apartment, he immediately turns his attention toward his massive collection of anime figures and gaming setup. Feeling a rush of excitement, he notes with satisfaction that his commute was faster than usual today. He proudly admires his apartment, calling it a steel castle specifically chosen for its 10-minute proximity to his job, all for the sake of the game, Dunex. Wasting no time, he eagerly straps on his virtual reality headset to boot up Dungeon Explorer Chronicle, affectionately known as Dunex. His consciousness plunges deeply into the digital abyss as he transitions into the virtual world. He marvels at the immersive world, reflecting on how this beautiful action-packed title completely dominated the VR gaming genre. Recalling its humble beginnings, he remembers a time when the game was completely obscure because its creator was entirely unknown. However, through relentless quality updates and massive content drops, the game exploded in popularity to become a universally recognized masterpiece. Spawning into the world, his sleek, armored avatar stands ready for combat beneath the twisted branches of a dead tree. He suddenly finds himself dwarfed by a colossal, menacing stone golem towering ominously over him. Cursing his own impatience, he realizes he recklessly saved his game in a highly dangerous zone the last time he logged off. The massive stone creature roars, rearing back its gigantic rocky fist to deliver a crushing blow. Rather than panicking, a confident smirk spreads across his face as he prepares to counter the massive strike. Back in the real world, he intensely mirrors his avatar's movements, throwing a powerful punch while blindfolded by his headset. Fully addicted to the adrenaline of the virtual battle, he shouts out fierce battle cries as he unleashes a flurry of attacks. The intense physical exertion of the fight leaves him heavily winded and panting in his living room. He gratefully acknowledges that finishing work exactly at 5 allows him the perfect window to catch the daily 6 o'clock server updates. He smugly justifies his life choices, admitting he specifically chose his current job just to accommodate his hardcore gaming schedule. His excitement peaks as he thinks about today's special in-game event, swearing to himself that he absolutely cannot miss it. Pushing his headset up to take a much-needed drink, he celebrates the incredible luck of being selected as an exclusive beta tester for the upcoming massive update. He sits back, exhausted but thrilled, knowing that as a beta tester he will be greatly rewarded if he performs well in the event. Clenching his fist, he can't help but get super excited at the prospect of the upcoming challenge. Thinking it might be a little early, he enthusiastically shouts out and decides he should get going. His avatar glides down toward the designated event venue, surprised to find that despite thinking he was early, many players are already gathered. Other players chat excitedly around him, boasting about their skills and speculating on how their abilities will probably get amplified anyway. Intimidated by their intense aura, he decides it is best to try avoiding them for now. He stands silently in his dark armor, observing the gathering competition with a cautious gaze. Looking down at his hands, he suddenly questions if he is actually nervous about the upcoming trial. Quickly brushing off his doubts, he hypes himself up, knowing he is strong enough to win and desperately wanting those beta test rewards. However, he acknowledges that the other testers are entirely different from the common players, no matter how much the average players try to cooperate. He notes that these elite testers can seemingly glimpse the future, making this the one Dungeon Explorer event no dedicated player can absolutely afford to miss. He firmly believes that the brutal nature of the event will definitely magnify the gap between average players and the true elites. Staring intensely ahead, he reassures himself that everything will be okay because he is far from being just an average player. Determined to face whatever the event throws at him, he braces himself as the clock finally strikes 6. His eyes widen slightly as a sudden, intense rumbling shakes the virtual landscape. He stands alone in a massive, rocky canyon as the ground begins to tremble violently beneath his boots. Suddenly, he bolts upright in his real-world bed, his room bathed in morning light and decorated with anime posters. Sweat drips down his tense face as he stares blankly, still reeling from the intense shock of the virtual event. Back at the office, he types away mindlessly at his keyboard, blending into the mundane reality of the corporate building and city streets. Sitting silently at his merchandise-covered desk, he remains completely oblivious to his co-workers whispering about how strange he has been acting recently. The gossiping colleagues wonder if he is finally bored of his game, noting that while he still leaves on time, he no longer seems as desperate as before. A couple of weeks have passed since the fateful event, yet the memory still haunts his every waking moment. In his mind, his dark-armored avatar steps forward, contrasting sharply with his real-world suit pants and dress shoes. Sweating profusely under the virtual sky, he finally comes to a grim conclusion. He bluntly realizes that the highly anticipated event was nothing short of pure hell. In a chaotic flashback, a massive dragon suddenly crashes down from the sky, instantly evaporating 10% of the players in a devastating explosion. He recalls the absolute despair of fighting the beast, knowing its incredibly thick skin prevented counterattacks from dealing decent damage while it mercilessly fired off huge random lasers. Other players valiantly charged forward with their weapons, desperately trying to breach the monster's overwhelming defenses. Sadly, that nightmare was only the prologue, as they only managed to defeat the dragon after sacrificing half of the participating players. Just as they thought they had won, the entire event venue suddenly collapsed into a terrifying abyss of floating platforms. From that crumbling ruin, the surviving players were forced to somehow find a way to exit the treacherous death game. To make matters infinitely worse, they had to navigate the collapsing platforms while fighting against a strict time limit. Furthermore, the crumbling ruins were completely rigged with a multitude of cruel, instant-kill traps. The survivors soon found themselves surrounded by a horrific menagerie of deadly monsters, including winged beasts, giant slimes, chained minotaurs, and massive wolves. Chaos erupted as the towering minotaur brutally smashed players aside, sending them flying with agonizing screams. Dodging the massive chain swings, he desperately maneuvers through the battlefield while other players are mercilessly slaughtered around him. Mid-swing, the colossal minotaur is suddenly struck by a devastating attack, leaving him staring in complete shock. He stands frozen, his blade drawn, as a massive spray of dark blood erupts into the air from the sudden impact. The dust clears to reveal a mysterious, cloaked figure standing victorious before the severed head of the chained beast. Gripping his weapon tightly, he narrows his eyes at the newcomer, his face battered but his resolve completely unbroken. A fierce warrior reels back, dodging a swift strike during the chaotic battle. Navigating the deadly swarm of monsters, he realizes that surviving this onslaught requires sheer, unadulterated luck. Frustration boils within him as he scoffs at the absolute absurdity of relying on something as fickle as chance. Spotting the exit, his dark-armored avatar makes a desperate, full-speed dash toward the towering white pillar. He sprints recklessly across the crumbling terrain, narrowly avoiding massive chunks of debris as the virtual environment violently collapses around him. Sweating heavily under the intense pressure, his sharp eyes remain fiercely locked on his only route of escape. Pushing himself beyond his limits, he proudly declares that absolutely no one else could clear this hellish trial but him. The intense virtual escape abruptly ends as a polished dress shoe lands firmly on the rain-soaked concrete of the real world. Bursting with adrenaline, he leaps joyfully down his neighborhood street, celebrating his unmatched survival skills. Returning safely to his apartment, he steps out of his wet shoes and walks into the dimly lit entryway. He exhales a heavy, exhausted sigh while peeling the specialized gaming glove off his trembling hand. Standing in his comfortable room with his VR goggles resting on his forehead, he pants heavily to catch his breath. A triumphant grin spreads across his face as he removes his gear, relishing the sweet taste of his hard-earned victory. Suddenly remembering the rewards, he dives toward his glowing computer monitor to eagerly check for the update email. He leans back in pure bliss upon seeing the message, thrilled that his incredible dedication has finally paid off. A dramatic license agreement flashes on the screen, startling him as it blatantly warns that installing the patch will transport him inside the game. He stares at the ominous warning in utter disbelief, questioning if starting the game will genuinely transport him to another world. Quickly brushing off his paranoia, he rationalizes that the terrifying text is merely an exaggerated expression or a quirky immersive setting. Knowing the eccentric developers all too well, he assumes this crazy stunt is simply part of their chaotic administration. Refusing to overthink the bizarre situation, he casually taps the confirmation prompt to proceed with the patch. The game interface boots up immediately, prompting him to either auto-pick or customize his brand new character. He breathes out nervously, admitting to himself that starting a brand new avatar is surprisingly nerve-wracking. Realizing that elite beta testers are barred from using their existing characters, he swiftly selects the auto-pick feature. Finding manual customization too tedious, he happily allows the game engine to randomly generate his appearance and abilities. With the character generation instantly completed, a soft, eager smile forms behind his goggles. Filled to the brim with anticipation, he confidently initiates the game's startup sequence. His digital avatar suddenly shatters into floating wireframes and data blocks as his consciousness plunges deep into the system. His eyes snap wide open in astonishment as he finds himself staring down at a massive, crowded school auditorium. An imposing older man stands confidently at the podium, officially congratulating the first-year students on enrolling in the prestigious academy. The administrator proudly declares their institution as the nation's premier adventure school, boasting the absolute best environment and latest knowledge. Addressing the standout students in the front row, the stern man demands that they rise to meet the academy's incredibly high expectations. Wide-eyed and trembling with shock, the young man instantly recognizes this highly specific scenario. He realizes with absolute certainty that he is witnessing the iconic opening sequence of Dungeon Explorer Chronicle. He marvels at the massive update's hyper-realistic graphical quality, stunned by how flawlessly the developers replaced the introductory chapters. Reeling from the overwhelming visual fidelity, he shouts out in pure disbelief that they have to be kidding him. He desperately tries to convince himself that despite Dunex's legendary quality, this vibrant world must simply be meticulously crafted CG. Attempting to ground his spiraling panic, he aggressively commands his inner superplayer to calm down and gather his scattered thoughts. Staring at the impossibly detailed environment, a sinking dread washes over him as he realizes this is definitely not just a game screen. He frantically grabs his own head, realizing that playing Dunex absolutely requires exclusive VR gear that he can no longer feel on his face. Accepting the terrifying truth that this is not a dream, he concludes he has genuinely been transported inside a living recreation of the game. Grappling with the sheer shock of his new reality, the reincarnated player frantically questions what actually happened to his physical body. Analyzing his bizarre situation, he deduces that there are usually two common patterns for this type of isekai phenomenon. He figures the first possibility is that only his consciousness was transported into this digital realm. Considering the second terrifying option, he realizes his entire real-world body might have been permanently overwritten by this new avatar. Knowing the only way to log out of Dunex is from the classroom, he resolves to wait and let the tutorial story progress naturally. As the Adventurer High School entrance ceremony officially concludes, the headmaster dismisses the students to their respective homerooms. Hearing his class called over the loudspeakers, he quickly confirms he has been placed in the lowest-ranking Class E. He takes a sliver of comfort knowing that being in Class E at least shields him from the relentless bullying of the arrogant upper-class nobles. Joining the massive crowd of students, he quietly makes his way out of the grand auditorium. Weighing the heavy burdens of real-world rent and grueling work, he genuinely questions if he even wants to return to his old life. Dreaming of becoming an overpowered protagonist, he gets incredibly excited about attending the same class as the main character and all the beautiful heroines. He pumps his fist in pure joy, thrilled to have been transported into such a ridiculously favorable starting condition. Deciding to cross the bridge of returning home later, he swears to thoroughly enjoy this fantasy world to its absolute fullest. However, as he climbs the academy steps, he suddenly notices himself becoming strangely and uncomfortably out of breath. Panting heavily on the prestigious academy's staircase, he stops dead in his tracks as he finally catches a glimpse of his own reflection. His eyes widen in absolute horror as he stares at the unfamiliar, completely unoptimized physical form staring back at him. Analyzing the chubby face and terribly out-of-shape body, a sickening wave of realization completely washes over his mind. Recognizing the horrific avatar, he instantly knows exactly which notoriously despised character he has possessed. He vividly remembers this specific villain relentlessly sexually harassing the main heroines and aggressively bullying the protagonist. This body belongs to Narumi Soyuda, the pathetic early-game villain who is destined to be violently purged and expelled from the academy. He groans in absolute despair, realizing he has been reincarnated as the universally hated mob character nicknamed Butao, the pig. Clutching his head in pure panic, he screams internally that this is the absolute worst-case scenario for his new life. Nearby students already begin mocking his pathetic display, loudly laughing at how his 100-kilogram body cannot even handle a simple staircase. The grim situation worsens as he suddenly remembers the specific heroine that Butao notoriously harassed. Looking up, his terrified eyes lock onto the beautiful and incredibly dangerous Heize Kyu. He recalls that she is a flawless national kendo champion who fiercely excels in both academics and elite combat sports. Despite her universally kind nature toward everyone else, she reserves an intense, burning hatred exclusively for Butao. He realizes with absolute dread that Butao had already sexually harassed her before the entrance ceremony even began. Cursing his fate, he acknowledges that Butao is not even a respected rival to the protagonist, but merely a disgusting, disposable obstacle. Even as a former hardcore player, he admits he feels absolutely zero sympathy for this repulsive mob character. Regretting his past choices, he furiously berates himself for ever using the lazy autopick feature during character creation. Knowing that Heize Kyu will soon become the central core of the main cast, he desperately tries to calculate a survival strategy. Since she already despises him, he resolves to keep his head down and completely avoid doing anything remotely conspicuous. As the beautiful heroine glares at him with pure disgust, an unexpected sensation suddenly pierces through his chest. He clutches his heart in deep confusion, realizing that the sudden wave of intense guilt and anxiety does not actually belong to him. A shocking revelation completely shatters his composure as strange, unfamiliar thoughts violently flood his mind. He accurately deduces that the original Butao's residual memories and dark feelings have permanently merged with his own consciousness. Burdened with a 100-kilogram body, the heroine's hatred, and foreign memories, he panics as his problems exponentially multiply. Refusing to go insane from the overwhelming stress, he aggressively forces himself to completely stop overthinking the disastrous situation. Clinging to his last shred of hope, he focuses entirely on rushing to the classroom so he can finally access the game's logout menu. Walking through the academy halls, he reflects on the sheer absurdity of being physically transported into a digital game. He solemnly accepts that this unpredictable reality is fundamentally different from the coded game world he once mastered. Stepping fully into the role of the despised villain, he understands the terrifying weight of his new existence. He realizes with chilling certainty that his mere presence as Butao will completely shatter Dunex's established storyline. Formulating a desperate new plan, he decides his only path to survival is to somehow get on good terms with the furious Kair. Panting heavily under the immense weight of his new body, he slowly lumbers down the long, echoing corridor. Nearing his destination, his heavy footsteps finally come to a complete halt right outside his designated classroom. Surprised by what he sees, he gazes up at the imposing doorway that marks the true beginning of his hellish tutorial. Taking a deep breath, he prepares to face the judgmental stares of the protagonist and the entire elite student body. Carrying the crushing burdens of universal hatred, a massive body, and foreign memories, he bravely steps forward into the unknown. Embracing the intense reality of his very first isekai transportation, he fully steels his resolve. With his escape route completely blocked, the reincarnated player officially begins his incredibly grueling second life. A bold title card displays a quick summary of the previous chapter's shocking events. He reflects on his cursed fate of being transported into the game world, trapped inside a massive body weighing over 100 kilograms. The situation is drastically worsened by the fact that the heroines already fiercely despise him due to his new body's dark history of sexually harassing them. To complicate matters further, the lingering, disgusting feelings of the original Butao still constantly plague his mind. Standing at the classroom entrance, the beautiful heroine Kir shoots him an incredibly sharp, disgust-filled glare. Flinching under her intense hostility, he completely freezes in his tracks with a look of pure terror. Without uttering a single word, she coldly turns her back and walks away down the hallway. Left completely humiliated, he lets out a pathetic, nervous laugh that quickly dissolves into a pitiful sob. Clutching his chest, he painfully accepts the harsh reality of just how deeply she loathes his existence. Shaking off the despair, he focuses his attention on the classroom's official seating chart displayed on the digital board. Knowing the academy strictly assigns seats based on academic grades, he realizes he cannot just sit wherever he pleases. Scanning the complex board frantically, he finally spots his own name located on the chart. To his absolute dismay, he discovers his designated seat is completely isolated at the very back of the room. He grimly concludes that being seated at the back of Class E officially marks him as the absolute lowest-ranking failure in the entire academy. Recalling the game's lore, he notes that just getting into this super elite adventurers academy requires passing an impossibly difficult entrance exam. Despite his current pathetic status, he realizes with genuine surprise that the original Butao must have somehow survived that terrifying trial to get enrolled. Hyping himself up, he firmly decides that simply being accepted into this prestigious school is an incredible feat worthy of some actual confidence. Walking proudly toward his isolated desk, a faint glimmer of renewed determination sparks in his eyes. The bustling classroom instantly falls silent as the imposing homeroom teacher confidently steps up to the front podium. Commanding the room with absolute authority, the stern instructor orders everyone to their seats while reviewing a digital attendance tablet. He announces the beginning of the homeroom session, stating he will first introduce himself before explaining the academy's strict rules. The sheer intensity of the teacher's commanding presence causes a nervous student nearby to visibly flinch in their seat. Delivering a blunt introduction, the man reveals himself as Mirai Hajime, a hardened alumnus of the Adventurers University. Snapping a piece of chalk with an intimidating crack, Mirai coldly transitions into explaining the school's harsh expectations. Sitting quietly at the back, the Reincarnated player notes that everything is still perfectly following the established Dunek storyline. However, as he listens to the booming voice, a creeping sense of unease begins to wash over his mind. Experiencing the scene in reality carries a terrifyingly different weight, making Mirai feel far more like a hardened soldier than a simple teacher. The suffocating tension in the room becomes almost physical as the overwhelming anxiety of his classmates heavily thickens the air. Watching his peers tremble, he realizes this intense atmosphere is exactly how true adventurers should be molded. He reflects on the world's lore, remembering that being an adventurer is the most celebrated and highly promising profession in the entire nation. It is an exclusive, prestigious title granted strictly to those elite few permitted to dive into the deadly dungeons. Naturally, surviving in those chaotic dungeons requires facing incredibly fierce competition, just like the ruthless environment of this academy. Mirai continues his intense lecture, explaining that merely being enrolled here grants massive societal privileges and highly valuable operational knowledge. Despite the heavy lecture, the Reincarnated player struggles to feel the reality of the situation since he already memorized most of this lore from the game. However, an imposing thought crosses his mind as he considers the very real possibility of being trapped here indefinitely. Staring at the chalkboard detailing guild benefits and adventurer ranks, he decides he desperately needs to start taking his new career seriously. Fortunately, the elite school's prestigious backing guarantees a wide array of highly lucrative options upon successfully graduating. Aside from advancing to higher education, top students are relentlessly scouted by powerful corporate guilds eager for fresh talent. This aggressive corporate interest stems directly from the fact that students gain real, lethal experience by diving into actual dungeons for their daily lessons. He smirks knowingly, recalling that the heavy emphasis on dangerous dungeon exploration is the core theme that originally gave Dunex its legendary namesake. A breathtaking, panoramic view of the advanced city beautifully sets the stage for the massive world of Dunex. Towering skyscrapers pierce the sky as sleek vehicles glide smoothly through the futuristic metropolis. Deep within this society, valuable resources harvested directly from dangerous dungeons heavily support the nation's booming energy industry. Realizing his unique position, he notes that this elite academy is the absolute best place for companies to hunt for fresh talent. Thinking deeply about his uncertain future, he firmly resolves to dive aggressively into the dungeons to secure his livelihood. Standing at the podium, Mirai commands the students to fully devote themselves and utilize their classmates for cooperative progress. Moving the session forward, the stern instructor announces he will hand over the personal terminals as he begins calling out names. The entire classroom falls dead silent as Mirai flips to the very bottom of his digital attendance roster. Hearing his name forcefully called out, Suda quickly snaps to attention and answers the imposing teacher. Approaching the front desk, he desperately hopes that all his current worries will vanish if he can just find a way back home. He respectfully receives a sleek, smartwatch-like terminal that functions as the official in-game menu. Glancing at the metallic device, he remembers it perfectly displays the player's status alongside standard smartphone features. Most importantly, he eagerly recalls that this terminal contains the crucial option for logging out of the virtual world. His heart races with wild anticipation as he aggressively taps the glass screen to boot up the digital interface. A holographic display instantly projects his pathetic level 1 stats, notably revealing his maximum health at 7 and a single skill named Glutton. Checking his own numerical status in reality sends a jarring, terrifying wave of shock completely through his system. He stares blankly at the floating digital numbers, completely demoralized by how incredibly low his starting attributes are. Gripping his hair in sheer frustration, he groans heavily while trying to physically process this disastrous reality. The horrific combination of being a hated failure trapped in a heavy body with a vile personality begins to fully crush his spirit. Sweating profusely under the pressure, he intensely prays to the developers that the logout function still exists on his device. Frantically swiping through the glowing holographic menus, he desperately searches every single available digital tab. His trembling finger slowly comes to a complete halt as his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated horror. A suffocating despair totally washes over him as he finally confirms that there is absolutely no logout button available. Meanwhile, in Class D, a different homeroom teacher formally concludes the orientation for the middle school continuers. Lounging arrogantly at his desk, a menacing blonde student named Korea rests his heavy boots directly on top of a cowering classmate. The crushed student beneath the desk groans in immense pain, desperately begging to be excused from the humiliating position. A smug lackey quickly silences the victim, harshly reminding him that his lowest rank means he must suffer until Korea completely wakes up. Opening his sharp eyes, Korea dismisses the pathetic complaints and confidently announces his impending raid on Class E. Cracking his knuckles menacingly, the arrogant delinquent stands up with a highly dangerous grin plastered across his face. Back in his isolated seat, Suda tries to calm his racing heart by accepting that he always dreamed of living in Dunex anyway. However, he bitterly resents the cruel, sickening irony of being transported into the body of the universally despised Butao. Refusing to completely surrender to despair, a fiery spark of intense determination reignites behind his eyes. He carefully activates his wrist terminal once more, heavily resolving to meticulously analyze his available tools. Scrolling quickly past his abysmal base stats, his sharp gaze zeroes in completely on his only equipped skill, Glutton. Reflecting on his decades of hardcore gaming and surviving the hellish tester event, he searches his vast knowledge for immediate answers. To his absolute bewilderment, he realizes that even as a veteran player, he has never once encountered this specific ability. He acknowledges that possessing any starting skill is incredibly rare and usually requires players to painstakingly re-roll their entire accounts. Analyzing the crude name, he grimly assumes the mysterious ability is completely useless and only involves eating massive amounts of food. Deeply annoyed by his own theories, he hypothesizes the system maliciously mocked his weight with this skill and swears to quickly overwrite it. Accepting his permanent imprisonment in this world, he eagerly resolves to dive into the deadly dungeons as soon as humanly possible. Suddenly, the classroom door slides open with a loud clatter. A smug lackey steps into the room, loudly commanding the pathetic students of Class E to listen up. He steps aside to introduce Korea Isamu, an imposing upperclassman hailing from Class D. The lackey arrogantly announces that Korea will now select a few lucky students to serve as his personal subordinates. He furiously commands the entire class to immediately present their terminals and reveal their hidden skills. Stepping forward to enforce the order, Korea menacingly cracks his knuckles with a chilling smirk. Refusing to be intimidated, a brave Class E student abruptly stands up from his desk. He angrily rejects the sudden intrusion, declaring they have absolutely no obligation to show their personal terminals. Empowered by his sudden defiance, The rest of the classroom quickly rallies behind their outspoken classmate. They furiously shout that the arrogant demand to pick subordinates makes absolutely no sense. Another student steps forward, aggressively demanding to know who the intruders think they are. He boldly points out that Class D isn't ranked significantly higher than their own class. Hearing the blatant disrespect, Korea's confident smile instantly morphs into a deadly, silencing glare. He slowly steps toward the defiant student, his voice dripping with icy condescension. Leaning in close, the menacing upperclassman dangerously asks if they truly believe their classes are equals. He arrogantly explains that middle school continuers have been diving into deadly dungeons since they were 12 years old. Scoffing at their level 1 status, he declares that the gap in their actual combat levels is completely insurmountable. Closing the distance, he growls that showing their terminals is an absolute order rather than a simple request. Without warning, Korea violently unleashes a suffocating wave of pure pressure across the entire room. An intense, invisible weight violently crashes down upon the deeply terrified students. The brave student instantly drops to his knees, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming, unseen force. Korea stands tall amidst the heavy silence, fully radiating a terrifying and monstrous energy. The entire class breaks out in a cold sweat as they visibly struggle to even breathe. Looking down at the trembling crowd, the upperclassman smirks in absolute, wicked satisfaction. He coldly asks if anyone else still wants to utter a single complaint. Commanding absolute obedience, he strictly orders them to quietly present their glowing terminals. Observing carefully from the back row, Suda instantly recognizes the oppressive pressure as the aura skill. He notes that aura is an advanced intimidation technique typically reserved for dominating monsters inside the dungeon. Sweating profusely under the immense pressure, Suda marvels at the terrifying reality of experiencing the skill firsthand. Suddenly, Korea points directly at the back row, aggressively singling out the fat failure of the class. He loudly declares that they will inspect the lowest-ranking student's status first. Caught completely off guard by the sudden attention, Suda visibly flinches and stammers. He mentally curses his pathetic appearance, fully aware that his massive weight makes him an incredibly easy target. Yielding to the oppressive atmosphere, he nervously holds up his terminal for the eager bullies to inspect. The lackey immediately bursts into laughter, ruthlessly mocking Suda's abysmally low stats. Korea brutally dismisses him as a literal mob character, bluntly stating he has absolutely no use for him. Relieved by the harsh rejection, Suda quietly lowers his arm and sinks back into his seat. He gratefully accepts the public humiliation, perfectly willing to play the role of the useless fat guy to avoid trouble. Dismissing the failure entirely, Korea immediately turns his sharp attention toward the rest of the terrified class. His piercing eyes suddenly lock onto a trembling girl seated quietly near the middle row. The lackey barks an aggressive order, demanding the startled girl to step up next. She nervously flinches, gripping her uniform tightly as she struggles to process the sudden command. Looking up with wide, fearful eyes, she timidly prepares to answer the imposing upperclassman. Stepping slightly closer, Korea drops his aggressive tone and smoothly asks for her name. She softly introduces herself as Sanju Sakurako, hesitantly revealing her terminal to the imposing group. Watching intently from afar, Suda instantly recognizes her as one of the game's primary heroines. He fondly recalls that her unique perspective and specific character route were a massive reason for Dunex's huge popularity. Korea stares intently at her holographic display, carefully analyzing her baseline abilities. He bluntly notes that her level 1 stats are quite weak and highly questionable for dungeon diving. However, his harsh demeanor suddenly shifts into a slimy, highly condescending smile. He generously offers her special treatment, declaring he will let her join his elite party simply because she is cute. Sakurako stammers in total disbelief, completely caught off guard by the uncomfortable proposition. She shrinks back slightly, her body trembling as she desperately searches for a way out of the tense situation. Suda observes the paralyzed classroom, fully aware that even combining their strength wouldn't defeat Korea's overwhelming power. Despite the massive power gap, he confidently predicts that the beloved heroine will never submit to them. Noticing her obvious hesitation, Korea scowls and aggressively demands to know why she isn't happy about the generous offer. Sitting quietly in the back, Suda easily deduces the incredibly simple reason for her silent rejection. She glares back with clear disgust, making it blatantly obvious that she absolutely loathes the sleazy invitation. Reflecting on his life choices, the young man states he enrolled in the adventurer's school for a specific purpose. The tension in the classroom thickens as the students silently process the escalating confrontation. A sudden shift in the atmosphere draws everyone's attention toward the middle of the room. Stunned by the unexpected interruption, the bully snaps his head toward the source of the voice and demands to know what is happening. Enraged by the defiance, the thug furiously questions the interloper, aggressively insisting that the frightened girl is obviously happy with the arrangement. Stepping forward with unshakable confidence, the bold student proudly introduces himself as Akagi Yuma. Staring down his oppressors, Yuma declares that he will soon become the strongest man in the entire school. The surrounding students stare in absolute shock at the sheer audacity of the newly declared protagonist. Outraged by the boast, Korea's cronies loudly question Yuma's grip on reality and mock him for not knowing his place. Unfazed by their jeers, Yuma stands his ground with a fierce and unwavering glare. The menacing upperclassman slowly turns his full attention toward the defiant freshman. A heavy silence falls over the room as Korea prepares to violently crush the boy's foolish ego. Snapping aggressively, Korea orders Yuma to stop getting ahead of himself, belittling him as an ignorant kid who knows nothing about real adventurers. Sneering confidently, a lackey assures Korea that the bold claim is just typical nonsense coming from a pathetic Class E small fry. Pausing for a moment, Korea closes his eyes and coldly agrees with his subordinate's assessment. Shifting his strategy, the menacing upperclassman mockingly asks Yuma if a month's preparation time will be enough. Smirking wickedly, Korea promises to personally test Yuma's arrogant claim of becoming the strongest. He challenges the freshman to an official duel with safety rules, ensuring that Yuma won't die even when he inevitably loses. Leaning in closer, Korea reminds him that the school is filled with monsters, making the title of strongest impossible if Yuma cannot even defeat him. Tipping his head arrogantly, the upperclassman asks the bold student if there is any flaw in his brutal logic. Meeting the fierce gaze head-on, Yuma loudly agrees and completely accepts the dangerous challenge. The tension between the two rivals peaks as their eyes lock in an intense, silent standoff. The rest of the class watches breathlessly, overwhelmed by the sudden declaration of an official duel. Satisfied with the arrangement, Korea turns away and prepares to leave the terrified classroom. Glancing back over his shoulder, the bully promises to burn the name Akagi Yuma into his memory. Delivering one final threat, Korea coldly advises the freshman to mentally prepare himself to lose an arm in the upcoming fight. As soon as the upperclassmen leave, the classroom erupts into cheers, praising Yuma as an incredible hero. Flustered by the sudden admiration, Yuma awkwardly admits his heroic boast was made in the heat of the moment, while the rescued girl shyly thanks him for saving her. Watching from afar, a female student admires Yuma's noble actions and wishes she could become an adventurer just like him. She warmly reflects that admiring such courageous heroes was one of the biggest reasons she originally enrolled in the academy. However, her expression darkens as she admits there was a second, much more desperate reason for her attendance. She reveals that her primary motivation was to escape the suffocating presence of her own fiancé, Narumi Suda. A sudden, harsh voice snaps her back to reality as someone impatiently calls out to her. Trailing far behind, the exhausted Suda struggles to keep pace, prompting a tense exchange about the growing physical and emotional distance between them. Looking at Suda's current pathetic state, she solemnly notes that she liked him much better when they were young children. She fondly remembers how he used to give her a gentle smile and bravely protect her whenever other boys picked on her. Staring at him with deep resentment, she curses the fact that he is now a pathetic shadow of his former self, making her escape the sole motivation for taking the grueling entrance exam. Trapped in his exhausting new body, Suda groans heavily as he struggles to keep up with his disappointed fiancée. The sheer physical exertion forces him to pause and desperately catch his breath on the walkway. Burdened by his terrible reputation and physical limitations, the reincarnated player slowly realizes the immense difficulty of his new reality. Walking down the school path, Care deeply reflects on the incredible 3 years ahead of her. Startled by a sudden voice, she stops completely in her tracks and turns around in absolute disbelief. Suda casually approaches with a grin, proudly announcing that he was also accepted into the Adventurers Academy. She stares at him completely stunned, struggling to process the amazing fact that he actually managed to chase her into the elite school. Gathering her chaotic thoughts, she silently admits that his shocking acceptance forces her to view him in a slightly new light. Knowing his standard merchant parents and caring little sister, she reasons he probably didn't use illegal methods to pass the rigorous exam. Her mind suddenly drifts back to a desperate memory of someone bowing deeply before her. She vividly recalls Suda's parents begging her to teach him sword skills despite the massive burden it places on her own training. Out of deep respect for his family's past kindness, she reluctantly accepted the grueling responsibility of becoming his mentor. She remembers agreeing to the arrangement both as a reward for his passing grade and because the boy occasionally asked for the training himself. Standing gracefully in the open yard, she powerfully swings her wooden practice sword through the crisp morning air. As she practices her intense forms, she genuinely wonders just how much actual effort the notoriously lazy Suda put into his studies. Pausing her workout to catch her breath, she humbly admits that his unexpected academic success genuinely impressed her. However, that fleeting respect shatters instantly as she remembers his absolute refusal to stop stuffing his face with unhealthy food. Furthermore, she grits her teeth recalling his complete inability to wake up early for their mandatory morning routines. Even when she successfully drags him out of bed for a run, he barely manages to maintain a jogging pace without collapsing. Sweating profusely on the trail, Suda immediately complains and violently begs her to stop the exhausting physical exercise. He arrogantly dismisses the hard work, arguing that manual training is totally pointless since the game's leveling system will naturally boost his stamina. Brushing off her warnings about the steep difficulty curve after level 4, he lazily insists he will simply rely on raw stat boosts later. Panting heavily while hunched over the dirt path, he groans loudly about how much of a miserable pain the entire ordeal is. He fiercely complains that since he crammed so hard to pass the entrance exam, he shouldn't be forced to suffer through early morning workouts. Watching him whine pathetically, she realizes that this incredibly arrogant attitude will get him completely crushed by the upperclassmen. She knows with absolute certainty that the Ruthless Adventurer Academy will completely destroy anyone lacking proper discipline. Suppressing her deep frustration, she softly apologizes and offers to match his slow pace so they can continue running. She sighs heavily, realizing that Suda fully expects her to always coddle him and accommodate his endless complaints. Staring blankly at the ground, she solemnly acknowledges that she has unfortunately always enabled his pathetic behavior. She assumes his newfound arrogance stems entirely from the fact that he passed the exam, creating a completely false sense of security. Carrying a heavy burden of guilt, she firmly believes that his terrible physical and mental state is largely her own fault. Deciding she must drastically alter her approach, she resolves to immediately stop giving him the constant leeway that ruined him. Staring coldly into his eyes, she bluntly declares that if he refuses to try, she will simply leave him completely behind. Without waiting for a response, she immediately turns and begins power-walking furiously down the dusty path. Shocked by her sudden abandonment, Suda desperately attempts to waddle after her quickly fading silhouette. Back in the present reality, the two walk side by side down the school corridor in a heavy, highly uncomfortable silence. Suda drips with nervous sweat, acutely feeling the intense, icy tension radiating from his beautiful fiancée. Spotting a familiar face in the distance, Kare suddenly gasps softly in genuine surprise. Gazing admiringly at the bold Akagi Yuma, she wistfully wishes her own fiancé possessed even a fraction of that heroic courage. Noticing her distracted gaze, Suda nervously glances over to see exactly what has captured her attention. A thick bead of sweat rolls down his face as he desperately struggles to break the incredibly suffocating silence between them. Gathering his meager courage, he tentatively calls out to her in a pathetic attempt to break the ice. He hesitantly asks what is wrong with her today, completely oblivious to his own profound failures as a partner. She slowly turns her head, violently piercing him with an absolutely frigid, emotionless glare. Shrinking under her intense hostility, he immediately flinches and deeply regrets ever opening his mouth. Desperate for any response, he nervously begs her to at least say something to break the torturous quiet. Realizing the conversation is completely hopeless, he weakly stammers and looks away in sheer panic. Hastily inventing a pathetic excuse, he loudly apologizes and claims he just remembered a highly urgent errand. Unfazed by his obvious lie, she curtly accepts his departure without showing a single hint of disappointment. Watching him eagerly sprint away, she reflects that it has already been 2 agonizing weeks since their training regimen officially began. Since he has shown absolutely zero signs of actual motivation, she firmly decides it is finally time to cancel the pointless workouts. She grimly admits that the only reason she endured his laziness this long was strictly to honor her solemn promise to his kind parents. Clenching her fists tightly, she fully accepts that any residual affection she once held for the boy is completely and permanently gone. Resolving to focus entirely on her own strength, she swears to stop wasting time with him and level up as fast as humanly possible. She sharply narrows her eyes, determined to quickly acquire the raw power needed to solve her most terrifying personal crisis. Her mind immediately flashes to the binding magical marriage contract, the inescapable legal document that forcefully chains her to the despised Sutta. A cold shiver violently runs down her spine as she realizes that the despicable pig could legally order her to commit indecent acts whenever he pleases. Fueled by pure desperation, she swears to find a way to completely void the cursed contract before he ever gets the chance to abuse his power. Suddenly, an unexpected presence completely shatters her dark thoughts, causing her to jump in genuine alarm. He boldly announces his arrival at the dungeon, fully determined to test his new reality. Recalling his journey after school, he remembers that players usually get to visit the heroine's house during the early game. Standing before a modest building, he stares intensely at the sign for the Narumi General Store. He sighs heavily, accepting the mundane truth that this completely ordinary shop is his new home. Hesitating at the doorway, he nervously questions if he should actually step inside the building. Feeling deeply reluctant to enter a stranger's home, he forcefully reminds himself that this is technically his own house now. Pushing the door open, he is immediately greeted by a beautiful woman warmly asking if he is already home. He freezes in absolute shock at the sudden, highly affectionate reception. An adorable little girl cheerfully welcomes him back, affectionately calling him her big brother with a bright smile. His eyes widen in complete disbelief as he processes the stunning sight of his unexpectedly attractive family members. Retreating hastily to his bedroom, he violently recoils at the absolutely filthy state of Narumi Sutta's personal space. Realizing that Butao's residual memories are actively influencing his thoughts, he notes a bizarre feeling of deep nostalgia toward the room and his family. He marvels that his new mother and sister surprisingly rival the game's main heroines in sheer, undeniable beauty. Analyzing his bizarre situation, he deduces that this living world is actively filling in background information that never existed in the original game. A sudden wave of intense dread washes over him as he realizes this unpredictable world building could be incredibly dangerous. He panics wildly, terrified that his massive advantage as a veteran player might become completely useless in this expanding reality. Desperate to verify his game knowledge, he heavily resolves to dive into a dungeon as soon as possible to test his actual skills. Glancing around the disgusting pigsty, he mentally prepares to tackle the massive mess left behind by the previous owner. Rolling up his sleeves, he aggressively begins scrubbing and organizing the heavily cluttered disaster zone. Pushing his existential anxiety aside, he decides to completely focus his energy on cleaning up the filthy bedroom for now. Sweeping the dusty floor, he mutters quietly to himself about how incredibly weird this entire domestic situation feels. He continues his deep cleaning process, slowly transforming the ruined room into a highly functional living space. Surprisingly navigating the clutter with ease, he admits that Butao's lingering memories are actually somewhat useful instead of just being a total nuisance. Pondering Keiru's earlier aggressive behavior, he hopes that eventually he will be able to freely access all of Butao's memories to understand their past. Pausing his sweeping, he suddenly notices something highly unusual buried deep beneath the trash. He carefully pulls out a childishly drawn document labeled as a magical contract securely binding Sutta and Q. Staring at the paper in complete confusion, he questions exactly why he found such a bizarre magical contract while cleaning his room. Examining the specific names, he realizes it definitively binds him and Q, even though it looks entirely like a young child's messy scribble. Desperately needing immediate context, he aggressively calls upon Butao's residual memories to lend him their hidden power. A sudden, sharp flash of recognition hits his brain as a crucial, deeply buried memory violently surges forward. Frustrated as the memory quickly fades away, he is thankful he at least grasped the core feeling of the document's immense importance. Knowing deep down that the scribble is highly significant, he carefully pockets the childish contract just in case he needs it later. Wiping the heavy sweat from his brow, he proudly declares that he has finally finished cleaning the messy bedroom. Filled with renewed, fiery determination, he excitedly sets out from his house to officially conquer the deadly dungeons. Arriving at the bustling guild building, he politely approaches the reception desk to finally sign up. The sharply dressed receptionist looks up from her stack of paperwork with a highly professional, welcoming smile. She smoothly asks for his identification, and he confidently agrees to provide it immediately. Seeing his prestigious academy emblem, she suddenly gasps and quickly apologizes for her earlier casual tone. Highly respecting his elite status as an adventure school student, she respectfully asks him to fill out his name and ID on the official forms. Confirming his enrollment, he waits patiently as she quickly processes his paperwork to issue his official dungeon permit. The receptionist politely hands him a ticket, directly instructing him to take it to the nearby gate while he silently assumes she is judging his heavy appearance. Taking the ticket, he confidently steps away from the counter and approaches the towering entrance gate. Pushing through the mechanical turnstile, he completely prepares himself to enter the dangerous, uncharted zone. A sudden, intense flash of bright light violently engulfs his entire vision as he officially crosses the magical threshold. The blinding light slowly begins to fade away, dramatically revealing the massive, cavernous expanse of the dungeon interior. He stares in absolute awe at the towering stone pillars and glowing crystals perfectly illuminating the massive underground cave. Dozens of fully equipped adventurers bustle around the grand entrance plaza, eagerly preparing for their respective monster hunts. Taking a deep breath, he fully steels his resolve and steps forward into the unknown, dangerous depths. Tightly gripping his wooden bat, he remains highly alert as he carefully navigates the rocky, uneven terrain. His heavy boots echo loudly against the cold stone floor as he confidently ventures further away from the bustling safe zone. The surrounding atmosphere grows noticeably darker and much more oppressive with every single step he takes. He cautiously peers down a dimly lit passageway, heavily anticipating his very first real monster encounter. Observing the heavily crowded entrance area, he marvels at how the barrier transition felt while noting the place looks exactly like a bustling tourist trap. Ignoring the noisy novice crowds, he firmly decides to push much deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. He silently slips past the large, unorganized groups of beginner adventurers and purposefully heads down a narrow, shadowy corridor. After progressing a significant distance, he notes with intense satisfaction that the annoying crowds have finally completely thinned out. Stepping into a remarkably quiet clearing, he completely readies his makeshift weapon for a sudden, unexpected ambush. A strange, squelching noise suddenly echoes from the dark, imposing shadows just ahead of him. His eyes instantly lock onto a blue, gelatinous slime aggressively bouncing straight toward him. He stands completely frozen for a split second, meticulously analyzing the iconic, low-level monster's predictable movements. The aggressive slime violently leaps high into the air, aiming a direct, squishy strike right at his completely exposed face. Reacting purely on veteran instinct, he violently swings his wooden bat in a wide, incredibly powerful sweeping arc. The heavy bat brutally smashes into the slime's gelatinous body with a loud, highly satisfying thud. The shattered monster instantly explodes into a massive, glittering shower of entirely harmless blue droplets. Panting heavily from the sudden burst of adrenaline, he slowly lowers his weapon and attempts to eagerly catch his breath. Staring at the glowing remnants on the floor, he proudly realizes he has just successfully completed his very first real dungeon subjugation. A profound sense of sheer awe washes over him as he finally fully accepts that he is truly living inside the dangerous world of Dunex. However, his intense excitement quickly dampens as he bitterly remembers that the experience point drop rate in these early levels is notoriously terrible. Checking his perfect mental map, he boldly decides to hunt for a specific location to test out a highly risky gameplay theory. Navigating the winding corridors, he triumphantly arrives at a massive chamber entirely infested with bouncing, blue slimes. He confidently identifies this as the ultimate grinding room, noting that the level 1 slimes here uniquely merge together to rapidly increase their size and overall strength. A sudden, terrifying wave of aggressively merged slimes violently surges toward him, causing him to instantly shriek in absolute panic. Quickly recovering his nerve, he fiercely raises his bat and arrogantly challenges the massive gelatinous horde to a brutal fight. As the bouncy creatures rapidly combine into much larger threats, he frantically questions his immediate combat strategy. A massive, newly merged slime lunges forward with incredible speed, completely threatening to violently crush him under its heavy weight. He rapidly dodges to the side, narrowly avoiding the devastating, squishy impact by a mere fraction of an inch. Gripping his wooden bat tightly with both hands, he fiercely prepares to launch a brutal, highly destructive counterattack. Relying entirely on his veteran player instincts, he relentlessly swings his bat into the massive horde until he finally breaks completely through their defenses. The massive king slime violently bursts apart, scattering thick blue goo entirely across the cracked stone floor. A glowing notification triumphantly chimes in his mind, and he celebrates wildly as he finally officially achieves his first level up. A sudden, unexpected surge of pure, crackling energy violently courses through his entirely exhausted veins. He gasps in absolute shock as the incredible rush of newfound raw power completely revitalizes his previously heavy, entirely unoptimized body. Clenching his highly energized fists, he happily admits he might get entirely addicted to the intoxicating feeling of his stats dramatically rising. Overflowing with immense confidence, he proudly declares that he no longer needs to feel like an inferior failure in his elite class. Looking around the now quiet room, he finds it incredibly weird and highly suspicious that such a famous early-game hunting ground is completely abandoned. He quickly brushes off his own paranoia, reasoning that the area obviously isn't completely off-limits since he casually walked right in. Flashing a highly confident smirk, he heavily decides this completely empty chamber is the absolute perfect place for dangerous, untested skill experimentation. Recalling Dunex's strict mechanics, he vividly remembers that while most skills strictly require high levels, there are exactly 3 rare, fundamental exceptions. He smartly notes that the first exception is the highly oppressive aura skill famously abused by the arrogant Class D bullies. Raising his hand, he explains that the second exception is the basic utility skill known as Torch, which magically produces a bright, highly reliable light source. He quickly lists the third and final exception as a literal small healing spell, perfectly confirming these are the only 3 abilities currently available to him. Analyzing the complex magic system, he realizes he can easily activate these skills either through a digital shortcut or by physically mimicking the required motions. He specifically focuses entirely on manual activation, accurately determining that physically moving his body on his own seamlessly triggers the magical effects. After thoroughly testing the physical movements, he is highly surprised and greatly pleased to find there is very little difference between the original game and this living reality. Fueled by overwhelming sheer curiosity, he recklessly questions if it would be completely fine to try out an advanced, highly destructive technique. Dropping into a low, intense combat stance, he furiously screams out the name of a legendary, high-level sword skill named Void/Shock. He swings his wooden bat with absolutely perfect form, intensely channeling his raw energy into the highly precise, complex movement. When absolutely nothing happens, he sighs in deep disappointment, openly admitting he fully expected the total failure since he hasn't officially learned the skill yet. Suddenly, the heavy air violently crackles around his weapon, causing him to sharply gasp in absolute, sheer disbelief. A massive, terrifying blade of highly compressed wind violently erupts from his wooden bat and totally obliterates the solid stone floor. He stumbles backward in total shock as the devastating shockwave completely shatters the cavern walls and kicks up a massive, blinding cloud of thick dust. Staring blankly at the massive canyon he just carved into the dungeon room, he absolutely marvels at the terrifying, godlike power he accidentally unleashed. A breathtaking view of a towering dungeon entrance perfectly sets the stage for the dark fantasy world. He reflects on aggressively diving into deadly dungeons ever since his first year of middle school. Despite his strict upbringing, he grimly notes that half of the adults still constantly risk their lives. He bitterly admits achieving only the pathetic title of being the second lowest-ranked student in Class D. Stubbornly masking his deep despair, he fiercely tries to convince himself there is absolutely nothing to be sad about. Arrogantly looking down on Class E to console himself, he is suddenly interrupted by a frantic apology. A panicked student violently shoves past him, instantly shattering his chaotic internal monologue right in the corridor. Waking up from the memories, Suda slowly opens his heavy eyes and stares blankly at an unfamiliar ceiling. Groggily asking about his location, he quickly realizes he is resting inside the official guild's medical office. A gentle nurse calmly informs him that he fainted from magical exhaustion near some incredibly low-level slimes. Deeply embarrassed, he defensively lies by claiming he just got tired and lost during his very first trip. He purposefully hides the humiliating truth about experiencing massive mana exhaustion against such incredibly weak slime opponents. He silently marvels at how he miraculously managed to activate a powerful skill he hadn't actually learned yet. Keeping his mouth completely shut, he firmly decides the nurse would think he is totally crazy if he confessed. Walking miserably homeward, he deeply laments his cursed existence while accurately counting 4 massive debuffs ruining his life. He explicitly lists his massive, entirely unoptimized 100-kilogram body as the very first terrible obstacle holding him back. Acknowledging the second severe debuff, he grimly realizes he is fiercely hated by a major original story heroine. Clutching his fiercely throbbing head, he identifies the highly painful resurfacing of Butao's memories as his third problem. Staring intensely at his glowing terminal, he violently complains that his absolutely pathetic stats are the fourth burden. Arriving finally at his front door, he gloomily fears the universe is actively trying to add a fifth debuff. His overly enthusiastic family eagerly prepares to dig into a massive, highly unhealthy fried dinner feast at home. He stares in absolute horror at the gigantic plate of intensely greasy fried food meant specifically for him. Realizing exactly why his body is so incredibly heavy, he silently accepts this terrifying daily diet caused his misery. Gathering his meager courage, he politely asks his mother to permanently lower his massive food portions from now on. His deeply concerned mother genuinely wonders what is entirely wrong since she prepared his absolute favorite fried meals. Firmly holding his ground, he boldly declares his urgent desire to diet while actively rejecting the greasy carriage. His little sister gasps in pure shock, completely amazed that her gluttonous brother suddenly wants a vegetable-focused diet. The entire family stares at him in absolute, stunned silence, completely failing to process his highly unexpected request. Blinded by deep affection, they insist his chubby body is perfect, forcing him to argue he feels highly self-aware. Retreating safely to his bedroom, he intensely calculates having exactly one single month before Korea and Akiji's fateful duel. Knowing the game lore perfectly, he vividly realizes a massive world-scale war is inevitably approaching after these events. Staring intensely at his terminal screen, he fiercely swears he must immediately start preparing for these completely unavoidable disasters. Desperate for any solid answers, he strictly resolves to quickly level up to safely gather crucial information about this world. He bitterly acknowledges that his highly loving but entirely enabling family will actively hinder his desperate quest for rapid self-improvement. Gripping his pudgy fists tightly, he fiercely resolves to completely overcome every physical limitation entirely on his own. He mentally reviews his incredibly cursed burdens, vividly recalling his massive weight, highly terrible reputation, and absolutely abysmal stats. He deeply admits having absolutely no clue whatsoever regarding the complex mechanics behind his sudden transportation into this reality. Returning to the dungeon anomaly, he firmly concludes that successfully activating the unlearned skill was entirely impossible under normal rules. He highly optimistically theorizes his unique, game-breaking ability to completely bypass strict system rules is a massive survival advantage. However, a highly terrifying suspicion rapidly crosses his mind as he deeply wonders if other people possess similar impossible abilities. Realizing he might be the only one capable of using this unique power, he curses his inability to defeat monsters and level up. He worries that his anomalous abilities could completely throw the established storyline into utter chaos. Fearing the unknown, he acknowledges that any deviation from the original plot will become a massive problem for his survival. Shifting his strategy, he immediately moves his skill training to the highest possible priority. Deciding to take action, he firmly resolves to visit the guild again the very next day. He sighs heavily as the endless list of urgent tasks just keeps piling up around him. The morning sun rises over the bustling city as a new day officially begins. The receptionist expresses genuine concern, hesitantly asking if he is truly well enough to dive after fainting yesterday. Brushing off her worries, he insists he is perfectly fine just as his little sister suddenly calls out to him. Eagerly rushing forward, she excitedly asks if he is heading to the dungeon and begs him to take her along. The heavy door slams shut with a loud clatter as he quickly makes his escape. He hurries down the street, desperate to put some distance between himself and his demanding sister. Navigating the crowded marketplace, he carefully weaves through the dense morning foot traffic. Distracted by his chaotic thoughts, he accidentally bumps into someone and quickly mutters an apology. He looks up in surprise, instantly recognizing the imposing figures blocking his path. Realizing he bumped into the arrogant Class D bullies, he shrinks back and apologizes again to avoid their notorious harassment. One of the upperclassmen sneers and mockingly asks if the little girl hiding behind him is his dungeon companion. He snaps his head around in total shock, realizing his sister actually followed him all the way here. The bully arrogantly lectures him about basic adventurer etiquette, fiercely demanding a proper apology for the collision. Trying to de-escalate the tense situation, he frantically waves his hands and begs the aggressive student to stop. Scoffing in absolute disgust, the upperclassman dismisses the pathetic display as incredibly annoying. The bullies burst into mocking laughter, sarcastically wishing him the best of luck for a pathetic Class E failure. He watches them walk away in silence, deeply relieved that the dangerous confrontation didn't escalate into physical violence. Turning furiously toward his sister, he demands to know why she followed him while she angrily defends her actions and throws childish insults. Panicking internally, he realizes that bringing her along will become incredibly bothersome if she actually sees him practicing his secret skills. He vividly imagines a disastrous scenario where she witnesses his terrifying magic and relentlessly begs to shoot monsters too. Desperate to stall her, he cleverly points out the guild's strict age restriction and smoothly apologizes for not being able to register her. Accepting his logical excuse, she cheerfully waves goodbye and heads back home while he sighs in immense relief. With the crisis finally averted, he quickly slips away into the shadowed alleyways. Regaining his absolute focus, he confidently sets his sights on his original destination. He proudly marches directly toward the massive, guild-affiliated library. He clarifies that his primary reason for visiting the vast archives is to research exactly why his unlearned skill mysteriously activated. Pondering the magic system, he questions how the game's digital shortcut keys for autocasting actually translate into this living reality. He notes that the alternative method is manual casting, deeply frustrated by the endless mysteries surrounding his recent magical success. Opening a heavy magical tome, he aggressively begins his research by thoroughly investigating the complex mechanics of autocasting. He silently flips through the ancient pages, his eyes rapidly scanning the dense magical theories. Discovering that autocasting simply requires intensely praying while channeling magical power, he hums thoughtfully at the surprisingly simple solution. Closing the first book, he completely shifts his intense focus toward the next crucial subject. He immediately pulls down another massive text, eagerly diving into the highly complex mechanics of manual casting for skilled magic users. Buried entirely beneath a mountain of open books, the determined player relentlessly seeks the absolute truth behind his dangerous new powers. He stares at the library books, specifically searching for any descriptions regarding manual casting. Frustrated by the lack of information, he realizes there are absolutely no records explaining how he successfully performed manual casting. He deduces that using unlearned skills is definitely not a default ability within this fantasy world. Leaning back in his chair, he suspects he is either the only person capable of this feat or its existence is being heavily concealed. Hoping to use this secret power as a precaution to switch places with Akagi, he finds it increasingly difficult to actually cast any skills. He furiously grips his head, entirely unable to grasp the complex mechanics behind his magical anomaly. Overwhelmed by the mysteries, he bitterly admits he understands absolutely nothing about his current situation. He stares blankly ahead, genuinely questioning what the hell this bizarre world actually is. Stepping outside the library, he pauses to observe the heavily crowded area. Scanning the bustling courtyard, he notices a highly unusual concentration of students from his own adventure school. A familiar, mocking voice suddenly calls out to him from the crowd. The arrogant Class D bullies approach with wicked grins, sarcastically calling the encounter a coincidence while loudly addressing him as a fatso. Recognizing the thugs immediately, he groans internally at the massive pain of running into them again. One of the bullies holds up a beginner's magic book, mockingly asking if the pathetic student still doesn't know how to cast basic skills. The thug laughs cruelly, sarcastically suggesting that learning magic might finally help him defeat a lowly slime. Caught completely off guard by the highly specific insult, Suda freezes in shock. The surrounding crowd immediately starts whispering among themselves, eagerly eating up the humiliating gossip. A nearby girl excitedly confirms the rumor, swearing it is the absolute truth. Another student loudly wonders how such an unbelievably fat guy who loses to slimes ever got accepted into the elite academy. A girl points directly at him, explicitly identifying him as the infamous Narumi. The Class D thug leans in closer, aggressively demanding the gossiping girls tell him more about the pathetic incident. Suda sweats profusely, completely paralyzed by the sudden, massive wave of public humiliation. Desperately playing dumb, he stammers and asks what the bullies are talking about. The upperclassman instantly shatters his lie, coldly stating he personally witnessed the embarrassing event just 2 days ago. He loudly announces to the entire crowd that Suda was carried out on a stretcher from the first floor, a zone exclusively populated by weak slimes. The humiliating revelation violently strikes Suda's pride, completely shattering his carefully maintained facade. He grimaces deeply as the crushing weight of the public embarrassment entirely overwhelms him. Staring at the mocking faces surrounding him, he realizes his pathetic reputation is now completely inescapable. He completely despairs over the fact that everyone now firmly believes he was legitimately defeated by a mere slime. Clutching his chest in agony, he silently curses his terrible luck, feeling this targeted harassment is just too much to bear. Seizing the opportunity, the bully arrogantly offers to protect the pathetic freshman since he cannot even defeat a beginner monster. Recalling their previous raid on Class E, Suda quickly realizes the thugs merely want to recruit another weak gopher to carry their heavy bags. He analyzes their cruel tactic, understanding that acquiring more slaves will further crush the overall morale of Class E. Forcing a nervous smile, he politely declines the offer by claiming he is currently too busy. Before he can fully escape, a heavy, oppressive energy violently erupts from the upperclassmen. Recognizing the terrifying pressure instantly, Suda realizes the thug is using the aura skill specifically targeted at him. Sweating heavily under the intense weight, he notes with dread that the magical intimidation is entirely focused on crushing his willpower. The bully leans in with a highly dangerous glare, coldly demanding to know if Suda still plans to refuse the generous offer. Reminding him of his pathetic status, the thug aggressively insists that a Class E small fry has absolutely no right to say no. Towering over the trembling freshman, he brutally declares Suda the absolute weakest guy in the entire room. Pushing his advantage, the bully viciously reminds Suda that inside the elite adventurer school, he is absolutely nothing. The incredibly harsh words pierce violently through Suda's fragile composure, entirely breaking his spirit. Lowering his head in deep defeat, he weakly agrees with the cruel assessment. Tears well up in his eyes as he completely accepts the horrifying reality that he truly is nothing. He desperately mourns the total loss of his real-world gaming gear and the high-level skills he once proudly wielded. Staring at the stone floor, he tearfully admits there is absolutely no place for a failure like him inside this prestigious academy. He heavily acknowledges that the entire student body genuinely wishes for him to completely disappear. Crushed by his massive debuffs, he darkly predicts it won't be long until he completely vanishes from the class roster. He bitterly accepts that this ruthless fantasy environment is entirely dictated by raw power and brutal social hierarchy. The surrounding students continue to mercilessly mock him, completely cementing his reputation as the pathetic loser who cried over a slime. He lets out a broken, pathetic laugh, entirely overwhelmed by the sheer cruelty of his new reality. The bully bursts into wicked laughter, loudly mocking the broken freshman for actually crying in public. Pointing directly at the weeping Suda, the thug gleefully draws the entire crowd's attention to the pathetic display. Just as Suda completely surrenders to the despair, a small, highly determined figure suddenly steps directly between him and his tormentors. His little sister fiercely throws her arms wide open, aggressively commanding the bullies to stay away from her older brother. Suda stares in absolute, stunned silence as the brave girl valiantly shields him from the imposing upperclassmen. Looking at her fiercely protective stance, a sudden glimmer of profound hope violently pierces through his suffocating darkness. He tearfully realizes that despite the entire academy hating him, he still has a genuine place to belong right beside his loving family. The tense atmosphere thickens as the siblings silently face the intimidating upperclassmen. Staring down the bullies, the young girl completely refuses to back down from the dangerous confrontation. Taking total charge of the situation, she firmly grabs her older brother's trembling hand. She confidently orders her brother to leave, proudly turning her back on the aggressive thugs. As the siblings attempt to walk away, the deeply humiliated bullies glare fiercely at their retreating backs. One of the upperclassmen violently snaps, aggressively demanding to know if they actually think they can just walk away. He angrily reminds the little girl that he is in the middle of talking to her brother, fiercely demanding her immediate respect. Losing his temper completely, the towering bully suddenly lunges forward to violently grab the defiant girl. Reacting with lightning speed, she pivots smoothly and delivers a devastating kick directly into the attacker's groin. Shocked by his sister's brutal counterattack, Suda frantically waves his arms and desperately begs her to apologize. Overcoming the initial shock, the enraged bully roars in immense pain and absolute fury. Before the thug can fully recover, she violently strikes him again with a highly brutal follow-up attack. The entire crowd watches in stunned silence as the fearless little girl completely dismantles the imposing upperclassman. Defeated and entirely humiliated, the massive bully collapses heavily onto the hard concrete. Enraged by his friend's humiliating defeat, another thug curses viciously and violently charges directly at the young girl. Sensing the immediate incoming danger, she quickly glances over her shoulder to bravely face the new threat. The furious upperclassman recklessly swings a heavy punch aimed directly at her highly vulnerable, small frame. Panicking completely, Suda throws himself forward while loudly screaming a desperate apology entirely on his sister's behalf. He violently grabs her shoulders, frantically begging her to apologize before the disastrous situation gets any worse. Desperate to protect her, Suda bravely throws his massive body directly into the destructive path of the incoming attack. The heavy fist violently connects with his face, sending a sickening, highly painful crunch echoing through the tense air. Reeling from the brutal impact, Suda realizes with absolute terror that his heavy body moved completely on its own. He immediately recognizes the sudden burst of protective courage as the residual feelings originating entirely from Butao's lingering memories. The enraged thug relentlessly beats down on him, furiously cursing the siblings for actually daring to oppose his authority. Enduring the violent assault, Suda suddenly snaps and violently grips the attacker's arm in a highly crushing hold. The shocked bully struggles desperately to break free, entirely unable to overpower Suda's sudden burst of monstrous strength. Glaring intensely through his swollen eyes, Suda radiates a terrifying, highly murderous intent that completely paralyzes his attacker. Watching her brother transform into a completely different person, his terrified sister loudly calls out to him in pure shock. As the panicked thug desperately demands to be released, Suda's subconscious mind violently triggers the magical autocast for his aura skill. A massive, suffocating wave of dark energy violently erupts from Suda's body, completely drowning the surrounding area in sheer pressure. The deeply overwhelmed bully chokes on his own words, entirely convinced he is about to brutally die under the crushing weight. Just as the terrifying energy threatens to completely crush the thugs, a sharp, highly commanding voice slices right through the heavy atmosphere. A mysterious newcomer steps confidently into the magical fray, casually offering to officially fight in Suda's place. The dust completely clears, dramatically revealing the handsome, highly confident face of the sudden savior. Everyone in the courtyard stops completely dead in their tracks, staring in absolute awe at the unexpected hero. Suda's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as he instantly recognizes the famous, high-ranking elite student standing right before him. The elite upperclassman stands tall with an unwavering smile, totally radiating an entirely different level of overwhelming power. Accurately identifying the elite student as rank 2 from Class A, Suda highly cautiously questions why he is suddenly intervening. He solemnly breathes out the legendary name, completely stunned to be standing face-to-face with the famous Tenma Akira. Tenma flashes a highly mysterious smile, vaguely explaining that he simply wants his fellow colleagues to peacefully get along with each other. Panting heavily, the terrified thug desperately asks the towering elite student if he can actually defeat him. Refusing to acknowledge the question, Akira just smiles brightly and totally ignores the bully's pathetic attempt at conversation. Realizing he is completely outmatched, the thug violently yanks his injured friend off the ground with a frustrated grunt. Staring back in pure hatred, the bully fiercely promises that he will definitely remember this humiliation. Akira playfully fans her face and giggles, teasingly calling the retreating bullies scary as they run away. Suda watches in awe, recalling that Tenma Akira is a famously beautiful girl ranked second in their grade who fights in full metal armor. He ponders her earlier words, suddenly realizing she referred to him as a colleague because, according to game lore, she is secretly cursed with a fat body too. Akira snaps her fingers, cheerfully praising Suda and his little sister for their incredible fighting spirit. Beaming with pride, she congratulates them on putting up such a great fight against the upperclassmen. Blushing fiercely from the praise, Suda stammers slightly as he tries to process the surreal encounter. With a highly energetic wave, Akira loudly announces she must hurry to shake off some annoying guys sent by her noble family. Suda and his sister stare blankly as the heavily armored heroine immediately sprints away down the bustling street. Overwhelmed by the intense encounter, his little sister suddenly bursts into loud, highly distressed tears. She furiously rubs her swollen eyes, loudly apologizing and frantically thanking her big brother at the exact same time. Smiling warmly, Suda gently places his heavy hand on her trembling head to calm her down. He softly tells her there is absolutely no need to thank him, sincerely believing he should be the one apologizing instead. Pulling her gently along the crowded path, he suggests they quickly move somewhere else before the bullies return. Sitting quietly on a park bench, he finally asks his sister exactly why she returned home so fast earlier. She looks down at her shoes and sheepishly admits that she never actually went to the guild in the first place. Surprised by the confession, he questions why she would blatantly lie about her destination. She explains that she already knew middle schoolers are strictly forbidden from entering the dangerous dungeons. Deeply confused by her actions, he asks why she stubbornly insisted on coming along if she knew the rules. Looking up with teary eyes, she quietly confesses that she just desperately wanted his attention. She emotionally admits feeling highly neglected ever since the entrance ceremony, noting that he even stopped calling her by her name. Apologizing softly, she tearfully acknowledges that lying and throwing a tantrum was incredibly annoying of her. Hearing her heartfelt confession, a profound wave of intense guilt completely washes over him. He stares at his heavy hands, violently re-evaluating his entire perspective on the universally despised Butao. Recognizing the sudden burst of protective courage earlier, he firmly realizes Butao deeply cared for his little sister. He silently questions if the supposedly vile villain was actually a highly decent guy underneath all the terrible rumors. Filled with immense guilt, he solemnly admits feeling terrible for borrowing Butao's body without understanding his true feelings. Softening his expression, Suda promises to pay much more attention to her and gently apologizes for being so busy with school. He affectionately calls her Kano for the first time, strictly warning her to never do anything dangerous again. Smiling brightly, he confidently hopes this is exactly how the original Butao would act in this situation. Wiping her tears entirely away, Kano flashes a massive, incredibly joyful smile. Relieved that the conflict is resolved, he happily suggests they finally head back home. Pausing dramatically, Suda tells Kano she should go home first because he has something highly important to do. He confidently declares that he wants to aggressively grind his levels today since he can finally enter the dungeons. Later that evening, Suda officially announces his return as he steps through his front door. His mother gasps loudly in absolute shock upon seeing his terribly bruised and battered face. She desperately questions if he is alright, highly concerned about his severe injuries compared to his condition 2 days ago. Brushing off her deep worries, he calmly assures her that he is perfectly fine. However, his mother notes that Kano has been seriously sulking ever since she came home alone. Sitting at the table, he correctly deduces that Kano genuinely wanted to explore the dungeon despite knowing the strict rules. He realizes with a heavy sigh that his little sister is still highly upset about being left behind. Groaning internally, he accepts that he must completely address her disappointment before the situation worsens. Looking her directly in the eyes, he solemnly promises to definitely take her inside a dungeon one day. He logically points out that if she truly aims to join the adventurer school, diving into dungeons will eventually be highly inevitable. Kano fiercely pouts and puffs her cheeks, completely rejecting his highly logical explanation with a deeply dissatisfied glare. Ignoring the sibling drama, his mother cheerfully announces that dinner is finally ready. The next day, Suda violently bows his head in a highly desperate, pathetic apology. Standing before the Class D bullies, he begs for mercy after completely humiliating them in front of the entire academy. He realizes that Class E is systematically targeted to make the weak students quit, and his rebellion totally ruined their cruel performance. Fearing massive retaliation, he understands the bullies' entire public display was completely wasted when Akira directly intervened. He aggressively explains that his rebellion was purely to look cool in front of his sister and strictly begs them to ignore the rumors. The furious upperclassman loudly tells him to shut up, violently grabbing him by the collar to drag him away. Completely submitting to their demands, Suda accepts his pathetic role and swears he has absolutely no ill intent. In a dark alleyway, he strikes a highly pathetic pose, desperately proving he is entirely worthless to avoid further beatings. The bully laughs cruelly, complimenting his sheer guts for submitting so completely before ordering him to follow. Walking behind the thugs, Suda firmly reminds himself that his ultimate goal is absolutely not to live a comfortable fantasy life. Instead, he fiercely resolves to investigate the mysterious transportation and desperately find a way to return to his previous world. Furthermore, he intensely swears to actively protect his new family, feeling deeply grateful for the warm place they provided him. He firmly believes that while he fights for his own survival, he must also sincerely repay Butao for borrowing his life. Looking toward the horizon, he notes that tomorrow is Monday, meaning the grueling academy curriculum will officially begin. Setting a strict short-term goal, he fiercely decides he must aggressively level up to acquire the raw power needed to survive. He accepts that mastering his abilities is the absolute only way to navigate the highly dangerous events rapidly approaching. Clenching his fists, he passionately desires the absolute power needed to protect himself and his newly cherished family. He deeply fears any highly unpredictable events that never existed in the original game. Returning home, he firmly resolves to stick strictly to the known narrative to completely avoid any deadly surprises. Suddenly, the loud chime of the doorbell violently shatters his intense concentration. Kano peeks her head out of the kitchen, casually informing him that a highly specific person has returned. Deeply confused by the sudden interruption, Suda slowly approaches the front door. He cautiously asks who is visiting, totally unaware of the massive storm about to enter his life. Stepping out of the shadows, a highly familiar figure stands patiently at the threshold, fully preparing to confront him. A formal letter-like narration begins, revealing that the protagonist is currently traversing a perilous dungeon alongside his companions. Delving into the past, the narrative shifts as he unexpectedly taps into the inherited memories of a boy named Butao. He vividly remembers a mysterious promise made with Kair before entering the academy, where they swore to always attend school together. The heavy weight of this childhood vow hangs in the air as they walk side by side in complete and uncomfortable silence. A stifling tension settles between the two as the protagonist acutely feels the intense awkwardness of their quiet morning commute. He suddenly realizes that Kair must hate this forced proximity even more, silently praising her faithful dedication despite her obvious discomfort. Frantically searching for a common topic to break the ice, he genuinely wonders if the original Butao would have been much more talkative. An agonizing and incredibly uncomfortable pause stretches on as he hesitates to speak his mind. Shattering the quiet, Kair bluntly confronts him by mentioning she heard a rumor that he was humiliatingly defeated by a weak slime. The terribly embarrassing revelation hangs thickly between them, massively amplifying the already heavy tension of their shared walk. Pure frustration violently bubbles up inside him as he mentally curses a specific long-haired individual for spreading the pathetic rumor. Shifting the conversation with a slightly apologetic tone, Kair visibly prepares to deliver some extremely unfortunate news regarding their dynamic. She flatly admits that she has already formed an exclusive party with Akagi, instantly establishing a new and permanent boundary between them. Consequently, she firmly states that she will not be able to join his party moving forward. The devastating weight of her sudden rejection sinks in deeply, leaving him completely and utterly speechless. Observing his stunned silence, she gently notes his negative reaction and surprisingly offers him a sympathetic chance to cry. He inwardly observes that Kair is already calling Akagi by his first name, aligning perfectly with the original game's world-saving plot. Feeling a sudden pang of pity for the original owner of his body, he deeply sympathizes with his poor neighbor Narumi Suda. Despite the harsh rejection, he finds immense comfort in the convenient reality that events are still progressing exactly like the game's storyline. Finally arriving at the bustling school campus, the protagonist mentally prepares himself for the harsh social challenges of his new academy life. As he steps into the lively classroom, a massive wave of disgust ripples through the students who immediately dread his sudden arrival. Catching the collective glare of his peers, he pauses in mild confusion at their blatant and unhidden hostility. A loud voice abruptly calls out across the room, aggressively drawing the attention of the entire class toward a single student. The mocking voice loudly broadcasts the humiliating rumor, ensuring every single person hears about his pathetic defeat at the hands of a slime. Panic rapidly flares in his chest as he realizes the gossip has spread like wildfire and everyone has easily identified him from the characteristics. His cruel classmates ruthlessly mock his loss, officially labeling him the absolute lowest of the low for failing against a monster a child could beat. A sharp, highly authoritative shout suddenly cuts through the relentless barrage of insults, instantly silencing the cruel laughter of the room. The heroic Akagi steps forward confidently, boldly urging his judgmental classmates to stop speaking so harshly to their peer. The entire room immediately falls into a tense hush as Akagi commands the full attention of the bullying students. Apologizing on their behalf, Akagi gently explains that everyone is simply on edge due to the unsettling events that occurred on Friday. The golden boy humbly admits his own deep nervousness, attempting to bridge the gap and smooth over the highly hostile situation. Narumi quickly replies with a brief non-committal response, awkwardly accepting the entirely unexpected defense from the popular hero. Staring intently at his savior, he analyzes Akagi Yuma as the core protagonist of Dunex whom players originally control. He realizes that approaching Akagi carelessly alters the storyline, noting that the usually player-controlled hero is now acting on his own empty volition. A disgruntled classmate sternly warns Narumi not to drag Classy down, prompting him to mentally swear extreme caution going forward. Completely ignoring Akagi's defense, spiteful classmates viciously suggest calling him Butao since he acts exactly like mindless livestock. The incredibly cruel nickname echoes menacingly through the classroom, officially cementing his terrible reputation among his unforgiving peers. While a classmate tells him not to take it seriously, he realizes with a jolt that earning the nickname Butao this early severely breaks the original game's timeline. He quickly theorizes that Akagi's unexpected intervention triggered a massive butterfly effect just as a cheerful morning greeting is directed at Kei. Shaking off his growing doubts, he steels his resolve to push forward regardless of the rapidly changing narrative variables. Standing awkwardly in the bustling environment, Narumi still feels completely out of place among his rapidly socializing peers. The teacher stands before the class, firmly reminding them that forming reliable groups is absolutely essential for safely diving into the dangerous dungeons. Offering them a golden opportunity, the instructor prompts the quiet students to actively mingle and introduce themselves once again. The classroom immediately erupts into enthusiastic cheers of adoration for Mirai-sensei as they eagerly prepare for the social activity. Establishing a clear and strict structure, Mirai decides they will perform their personal introductions strictly in the order of their academic grades. The instructor gestures forward, confidently calling upon the top student Akagi to bravely begin the entire presentation process. Stepping up with an air of natural leadership, the young hero confidently prepares to address his waiting and highly attentive classmates. Akagi Yuma boldly introduces himself as an aspiring warrior from Tokyo who exclusively wields a reliable one-handed sword. Following his highly impressive lead, Heizker steps forward and gracefully offers her own cheerful introduction to the quiet room. One by one, the rest of the high-ranking students smoothly take their turns presenting their unique combat skills to the admiring class. The steady rhythm of confident and well-practiced introductions continues to echo steadily throughout the busy classroom environment. Watching his talented peers flawlessly execute their speeches, a deep sense of impending dread violently washes over the sweating Narumi. He anxiously realizes that he has barely spoken a single coherent word today beyond a few pathetic and easily ignored murmurs of agreement. Desperately resolving to abandon his low profile, he realizes he must force himself to act more cheerful just to successfully secure a necessary party. The universally dreaded moment finally arrives as Mirai-sensei loudly calls upon Narumi to finish the remaining student roster. Standing up abruptly with a massive burst of nervous energy, Narumi practically shouts his full name to the staring crowd. He frantically declares himself an aspiring priest who strangely relies on a blunt wooden bat as his primary weapon of choice. A heavy, intensely awkward silence instantly crashes down over the entire classroom following his bizarre and highly unconventional combat reveal. Desperately trying to salvage the entirely ruined moment, he bows deeply and practically begs the room for their future cooperation. The crushing silence stretches on agonizingly as absolutely no one steps forward to offer a positive response to his pathetic plea. The palpable tension in the room rapidly thickens while the poor boy remains entirely frozen in his highly uncomfortable and desperate bow. Averting their eyes entirely, the rest of the students silently agree to completely ignore his deeply embarrassing social display. With a quiet sigh of sheer resignation, the instructor smoothly regains control of the room to finally move past the painful awkwardness. Mirai-sensei briskly announces that the class will now transition directly into their official and highly important guild orientation tour. He sternly advises the students to take diligent notes since they will heavily utilize these specific guild facilities long after they formally graduate. Attempting to casually recruit a passing classmate in the busy hallway, Narumi is instantly brushed off and left completely hanging. Rejected and utterly isolated, he miserably wanders down the quiet corridor while mentally processing his massive social failure. Trying to carefully mask his crushing disappointment, he weakly attempts to convince himself that exploring perilous dungeons entirely solo might not be so bad. The guided orientation tour officially begins, proudly showcasing the impressive architectural scale and intricate details of the massive guild building. Students quietly observe the bustling daily activity of seasoned adventurers meticulously preparing for their own highly dangerous combat expeditions. Murai introduces the Grand Arena, explaining it as the perfect controlled environment for safely adjusting strength and honing raw combat skills. Pointing out the dedicated medical office, the instructor heavily assures them that a skilled priest is always on standby to instantly treat severe injuries. Delivering a critical final warning, he strictly mandates that any exploration of the first 2 dungeon floors absolutely requires bringing capable company. The teacher drops a massive bombshell on the isolated loner, outright demanding that every single student immediately form a mandatory group of 3 to 5 people. A dark aura of pure, unadulterated murderous rage completely envelopes Narumi as he internally vows to destroy his smiling teacher for this seemingly impossible requirement. Oblivious to his students' utter despair, Murai casually waves off the strict party rule as a mere formality to predictably ensure no one gets dangerously lost. Instructing them to grab a quick lunch at the cafeteria if needed, the teacher officially orders the newly formed groups to gather at the front plaza in exactly 1 hour. The exact moment they are formally dismissed, the classroom erupts into frantic chatter as eager students immediately rush to secure their preferred teammates. The highly competitive scramble quickly intensifies as everyone violently pushes forward to seek out the absolute strongest and most reliable allies available in the room. Watching the chaotic recruitment frenzy unfold all around him, Narumi finds a small glimmer of comfort in realizing that everyone else is also desperately rushing to quickly level up and form a party. A harsh classmate violently shoves Narumi aside while cruelly telling him that he is just in the way. Shaking off the painful insult, Narumi heavily clenches his fists and desperately resolves to do his absolute best. Approaching potential teammates, he is immediately met with disgusted scoffs as they mock the very idea of partying up with someone like him. Another classmate brutally shoots him down on the spot, flatly stating a complete lack of interest. A slightly more timid student nervously stammers out a weak apology, claiming their group is already completely full. Enduring brutal rejection after rejection, the completely isolated boy is left staring blankly at the cold floor. Realizing it is utterly hopeless to find anyone, he grimly notes that his peers have already formed their tight-knit parties based entirely on existing social relationships. He internally accepts the harsh and depressing truth that nobody has the time to casually hang out with a known failure. Peering across the busy room, he quickly rationalizes that it does not matter anyway since the heroic Akagi surely has his own elite group established. Watching Akagi politely decline a massive crowd of eager applicants, Narumi feels a sharp, sudden pang of deep envy. The wildly popular hero abruptly turns his gaze, locking his intense eyes directly onto the lonely outcast. Striding overconfidently, Akagi absolutely shocks the entire room by enthusiastically asking Narumi to team up. Utterly stunned by the proposal, Narumi mentally wonders if this sudden and unbelievable invitation is actually some kind of lethal curse. Panicking intensely internally, he begs the hero to stop joking around, fully aware he desperately needs a strong party member but terrified of the narrative consequences. He realizes with sheer horror that continuing to directly interact with the main character will completely shatter the established game's storyline. Knowing his only survival tool is his meta-knowledge of the game's strict events, he deeply dreads losing his one true advantage if the narrative drastically changes. Frantically searching for a valid excuse to decline the offer, he awkwardly begins to reject the generous proposal. Catching Care glaring sharply at him, he quickly realizes he absolutely cannot use her as a convenient excuse to seamlessly back out. Staring right back at her, he silently remembers that she is definitively supposed to team up exclusively with the hero. Sweating profusely under the intense pressure, he silently pleads for Care to step in and aggressively drag Akagi away from him. Casually approaching the two boys, Care coldly points out that she is officially the only student left without a dedicated team. When she smoothly asks to join their specific group, Narumi screams internally in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Akagi warmly and instantly welcomes the new addition, fully finalizing the bizarre and highly unexpected three-person party. Walking awkwardly alongside them, Narumi bitterly wonders how he ended up grouped with a girl who seemingly despises his very existence. Deciding to actively make the best of a terribly awkward situation, he resolves to discreetly investigate the main protagonist's current mindset. Before he can even speak a word, Keru abruptly calls out to the hero using his highly familiar first name. She sternly warns Akagi not to try anything exceptionally stupid with her newly assigned, incredibly fragile party member. Chuckling lightly at her fierce and sudden protectiveness, the heroic swordsman easily agrees to behave himself. Narumi mentally concedes that she is entirely right to be cautious, vividly recalling how the original Butao would violently attack the hero out of pure, unfiltered jealousy. Acknowledging that he is thankfully no longer the real Butao, he heavily snaps to attention as Akagi suddenly addresses him. The highly perceptive protagonist kindly asks if Narumi had something specific he urgently wanted to say earlier. Seizing the absolutely perfect conversational opening, Narumi excitedly prepares to ask about the hero's highly personal circumstances. Feeling Kaoru's incredibly sharp gaze burning into his back, he carefully calibrates his tone to expertly avoid raising any immediate suspicion. Feigning a casual air of genuine curiosity, he casually asks Akagi what ultimately inspired him to pursue the highly dangerous path of an adventurer. The golden boy dramatically pauses, genuinely pondering the sudden and surprisingly deep question presented to him. A deeply thoughtful and peaceful silence stretches comfortably between the trio as Akagi looks fondly up at the bright sky. Breaking the quiet atmosphere, the young swordsman bashfully admits that simple, pure admiration is his main driving force. He fondly explains how watching legendary heroes endlessly battle on television sparked a massive, lifelong childhood dream. Smiling gently and unapologetically, Akagi rubs the back of his neck and genuinely hopes his simple answer truly suffices. Narumi stares at the talented boy in quiet awe, strictly remembering that the hero was once nothing more than an entirely empty vessel for players. Seeing the deeply genuine passion burning brightly in Akagi's eyes, Narumi realizes the boy is now a fully realized and living human being. Recalling epic and brutal battles from the original game, Narumi fiercely marvels at how this simple admiration drove the hero to bravely face truly impossible odds. Looking directly past the legendary mythical status, he simply sees a normal, earnest high school freshman standing confidently before him. The invisible, rigid barrier permanently separating the controlling player and the digital character completely shatters in Narumi's fragile mind. Moved by absolute, genuine respect, he makes a highly solemn internal vow to fiercely support this incredibly brave young man. Snapping abruptly back to cold reality, Narumi firmly shakes his head to aggressively clear his rapidly wandering thoughts. Looking Akagi dead in the eye, he highly sincerely praises the brave hero's incredibly pure and honorable motivations. Taken completely and utterly off guard by the genuine compliment, Akagi heavily blinks in mild, unexpected confusion. A faint, highly noticeable blush spreads quickly across the young hero's face as he humbly and awkwardly averts his bright eyes. Deep within the highly perilous second floor of the dungeon, an authoritative voice loudly concludes the grueling and exhaustive orientation session. The strict instructor carelessly permits the freshman students to hunt freely with their new parties, while heavily warning them not to be late for regular classes tomorrow. With a massive, highly booming command, the imposing teacher completely and officially dismisses the utterly exhausted freshman class. Fired up to fiercely reclaim his deeply lost time, Narumi eagerly plans to rent a powerful weapon until a familiar voice suddenly calls his name. He rapidly turns around in sheer surprise, quickly finding the young heroic swordsman standing casually right behind him. Akagi boldly and loudly announces his party's highly dangerous, incredibly risky intention to aggressively dive straight into the brutal third floor. Offering a highly warm and deeply inviting smile, the talented swordsman gently and expectantly extends his open hand. Without a single shred of fear or hesitation, he officially invites the lonely outcast to bravely join their high-stakes, life-threatening dungeon raid. Establishing the narrative, the grand exterior of the Haze Pavilion stands proudly in the quiet morning light. Inside the traditional estate, a peaceful silence completely blankets the serene surroundings. Sudden rustling noises shatter the calm atmosphere as someone urgently begins to stir within the dark room. A brief, heavy moment of absolute stillness follows the abrupt morning commotion. A digital device sharply pings, violently cutting through the lingering quiet of the sleeping quarters. A single, glaring notification instantly lights up the screen of the resting mobile phone. Glancing down in mild surprise, the character rapidly notices an unexpected message sent directly by Sakurako. Shifting the scene to Narumi's house on a Monday, a shocked exclamation violently rings out concerning a pathetic defeat by a slime. The humiliating weight of the monstrous rumor hangs heavily in the tense domestic atmosphere. A quiet standoff abruptly ensues as visitors unexpectedly arrive at the front door. A nervous guest stammers out a highly awkward morning greeting to a fiercely glaring Kano. The concerned visitor delicately brings up a deeply worrying rumor regarding Suda's sudden hospitalization. Kano coldly shuts down the invasive inquiry, firmly stating that her older brother is perfectly fine. The frantic guest desperately presses for more details about potential injuries while Kano aggressively doubles down on his safety. Turning her back dismissively, Kano loudly yells for her brother to personally deal with the persistent visitor. The incredibly harsh rejection leaves the uninvited guest standing highly awkwardly alone in the doorway. Kara bitterly reflects on her own cold behavior since spring break, completely understanding Kano's fiercely protective hostility. Her intense internal monologue is abruptly interrupted by a sudden, highly confusing noise originating from inside the house. Suda casually emerges to greet her, offering a heavily disjointed and noticeably groggy morning acknowledgement. Stealing her raw nerves, Kaoru immediately prepares mentally to firmly cancel their childhood magical marriage contract. She strongly believes that remaining softly attached to one another will ultimately and completely ruin both of their futures. Her primary goal aggressively solidifies around officially breaking the highly childish pact they foolishly signed years ago. Hesitating slightly, she quickly realizes that confronting him bluntly will only massively trigger his notoriously stubborn nature. Pivoting her strategy entirely, she boldly declares they will walk to school together purely for efficiency's sake. Gripping this new excuse tightly, she actively plans to forcefully spin the entire situation to her ultimate advantage. Ignoring his weak protests about currently finishing his breakfast, she ruthlessly and decisively drags him out the door. The tense pair rapidly embarks on their morning commute, heavily wrapped in an incredibly suffocating silence. Glancing sideways at him, she deeply ponders his incredibly bizarre and highly unsettling behavior since the entrance ceremony. She acutely notes that his usual fumbling demeanor has been completely replaced by a strange, calculated certainty. Vivid memories of his past highly clingy behavior violently flood her mind, sharply contrasting his current quiet nature. She angrily remembers how he used to fiercely demand her absolute attention, loudly questioning why she ignored his urgent calls. In the past, he would aggressively accuse her of valuing her tedious studies far over their sacred childhood bond. Snapping back to the harsh present, she is highly unnerved that he no longer persistently calls or inappropriately stares at her. Massive doubts swirl violently in her mind as she desperately questions if his drastic personality shift is actually genuine. Deciding to brutally test his limits, she bluntly and coldly brings up the highly humiliating rumor of his defeat by a slime. A crushing, agonizing tension instantly descends upon the two as the devastating words fully sink in. Offering a heavily half-hearted apology, she swiftly prepares to deliver an even heavier and more absolute blow. She fiercely drops the massive bombshell that she has officially formed an exclusive party with the popular hero Akagi. Delivering the final, brutal strike, she coldly and totally refuses any possibility of ever joining his doomed group. A profound sense of sheer confusion and utter shock completely paralyzes him in the wake of her merciless rejection. Smiling cheerfully, a girl expresses genuine relief that Kaoru has Akagi by her side, completely thrilled for her fortunate situation. The lively conversation continues in the background as Kaoru silently processes her classmates' enthusiastic congratulations. Observing Suda closely, she mentally acknowledges that he has never been the type of person capable of hiding his true feelings this perfectly. A wave of profound doubt washes over her as she seriously questions if he has genuinely lost all romantic interest in her. Staring blankly ahead, she realizes she should feel entirely relieved by his distance, yet a strange sense of unease lingers within her. The noisy classroom atmosphere fades into the background as she remains completely lost in her conflicting inner thoughts. Her deep contemplation is abruptly shattered as a new, highly disruptive commotion begins to unfold nearby. A mocking classmate loudly intercepts Suda, bringing up the deeply humiliating rumor of his pathetic defeat by a lowly slime. The brutal taunt echoes loudly, instantly drawing the intense, judgmental stares of the entire classroom toward the isolated boy. Panic flares violently within Suda as he realizes the degrading gossip has already spread and everyone has easily identified him. Cruel laughter erupts from the students as they relentlessly mock his failure against a monster weak enough for a child to defeat. They ruthlessly cement his reputation as the absolute lowest of the low, openly marveling at how anyone could possibly manage such a pathetic loss. A sharp, highly authoritative voice suddenly cuts through the vicious bullying, firmly ordering the cruel classmates to back down. Stepping forward with confident authority, the charismatic hero easily commands the full attention of the silent room. He stands tall and completely resolute, offering an unexpected shield of protection to the deeply humiliated outcast. Watching from a short distance away, Kaoru gazes intently at the brave young man effortlessly diffusing the hostile situation. She mentally locks onto Akagi Yuma, deeply recognizing the powerful aura of leadership radiating from the celebrated student. Reflecting on a pivotal past event, she firmly reaffirms her absolute desire to align herself with someone exactly like him. However, a sudden pang of deep inner turmoil violently twists her expression as unseen burdens weigh heavily on her conscience. She bitterly laments the magical contract tying her to Suda, knowing she can never love freely until she completely severs that pathetic bond. Forcing herself to dig into the past, she tries desperately to recall the exact, binding contents of their childish agreement. Frustration bubbles up as she realizes her memories of the specific details remain incredibly faint and heavily fragmented. She specifically strains to remember the crucial line regarding the ultimate penalty for breaking the magical pact. Snapping out of her deep thoughts, she notices Akagi smoothly approaching a quiet classmate holding rental equipment. Turning his warm attention directly toward her, the golden boy effortlessly initiates a friendly and highly unexpected conversation. He politely confirms her name as Hayes, mentioning with a gentle smile that he recognized it straight from the official class register. Without wasting a single second, he boldly extends an exclusive invitation for her to officially join his dungeon crawling party. Caught completely off guard by the incredible offer, she immediately questions his specific reasoning for choosing her. He honestly explains that her brave willingness to stand up against Class D's harassment deeply impressed him. Thrilled by the unbelievable opportunity, she eagerly and loudly accepts his gracious invitation on the spot. She silently rejoices in realizing the magical contract carries no real penalty, heavily relieved she can finally focus without Suda dragging her down. Tachijai Naoto, an aspiring wizard, sternly reminds his overeager teammates to carefully consider their fragile backline's limited combat range. Sanju Sakurako, the aspiring priest, nervously begs the frontline not to stray too far since she lacks the power to heal massive injuries. The hero mentally calculates that his highly anticipated battle against Korea is merely 1 month away, leaving absolutely no room for carelessness. A dark, highly imposing vision of the formidable Korea intensely flashes through his highly focused mind. Analyzing his dangerous rival, he grimly estimates that Korea's overwhelming aura firmly places him well beyond level 10. He strategically reflects that leveling up significantly boosts physical strength and eventually unlocks advanced jobs like samurai or saint. Acknowledging their severe lack of time, he urgently stresses the absolute necessity of leveling up to officially graduate from their weak jobless states. Glancing fondly at his newly formed team, a massive surge of pure confidence tells him they can actually achieve this impossible goal. He smirks knowingly, highly confident in their success because they secretly possess a deeply powerful hidden weapon to turn the tides. Gathering her resolve, Kaoru firmly sets her intentions regarding the future. Pointing out that she is officially the only one left without a group, she boldly asks to join their party. She intensely focuses her request, emphasizing that she wants to join them personally. A heavy moment of silent tension settles over the students as they process the sudden request. The group dynamic rapidly shifts as unspoken thoughts bounce between the gathered classmates. Breaking the silence abruptly, she loudly calls out to Yuma to grab his undivided attention. Shifting into a critical tactical review, the group carefully discusses how they can actively improve their dungeon performance from the previous day. Acknowledging the highly valid point, someone thoughtfully suggests emulating Kotaru's specific combat style. Excitement rapidly builds as they eagerly bring up Kotaru clearing the grueling 31st floor during last night's broadcast. While praising Kotaru's brilliant rearguard commands, a sudden realization hits that Yuma intentionally changed the subject. A quiet epiphany dawns, revealing that if Suda fully understands their current condition, he will undoubtedly feel much more at ease. Kaoru deeply notes that Yuma is being exceptionally considerate towards Suda after his humiliating defeat by a slime. Yuma pivots smoothly, politely asking Narumi if he was trying to desperately say something just a moment ago. Narumi hesitates visibly, caught completely off guard by the sudden and direct attention. Gathering his fractured courage, Narumi earnestly asks Akagi why he originally wanted to become an adventurer. The golden boy pauses dramatically, genuinely pondering the heavy weight of the unexpected question. A comfortable and reflective silence blankets the group as Akagi thoroughly searches for his honest answer. Looking away shyly, he humbly confesses that pure, unfiltered admiration is his primary driving force. The simple yet profound admission deeply resonates, hanging heavily in the quiet atmosphere. Kaoru silently agrees, mentally acknowledging that she completely shares those exact same feelings. She wrestles with violently conflicting emotions, desperately wanting to distance herself from Suda while simultaneously feeling tethered to him. A sharp pang of guilt strikes her as she fears completely cutting ties would be horribly rude. Commanding the room's attention, Yuma loudly addresses the entire gathered group. He boldly proposes inviting Suda to their official party, earnestly asking for everyone's honest opinions on the matter. Internal friction instantly sparks as teammates desperately want to honor Yuma's decision while silently harboring massive doubts. Deep concerns immediately arise regarding how their judgmental classmates will react to them openly welcoming the guy who lost to a slime. Brushing aside peer pressure, they critically question how Narumi Suda himself actually feels about the entire situation. Brimming with unshakable optimism, Yuma confidently declares he will worry about the consequences only after inviting him and helping him grow. He fiercely acknowledges the massive trouble this might cause his friends, yet remains entirely undeterred. His eyes burn with intense determination as he vows that nothing matters as long as they can successfully defeat Korea. A heavy, highly serious silence follows as the pure gravity of the upcoming battle fully sinks in. Kaoru bitterly plans to completely suppress her hatred for the idea, vehemently refusing to ever discuss her strained relationship with Suda. She coldly rationalizes the painful situation by reminding herself that the current Suda has entirely lost interest in her anyway. Watching the unfolding dynamic, she confidently predicts that Suda will completely put his ultimate trust in Yuma. Recalling the official invitation, she logically concludes that Suda has absolutely no valid reason to reject such a massively advantageous offer. Utterly dumbfounded by the proposal, Suda aggressively questions why they would ever want someone as pathetic as him. The raw, unfiltered self-deprecation catches his peers completely off guard. A tense, sharp pause absolutely freezes the conversation as his harsh words hang heavily in the air. Breaking the intense silence, Yuma warmly reveals he extended the invite simply because Suda genuinely complimented him. Processing the twisted logic, someone notes that while Kaoru raised her voice first, it was Suda's praise of the ultimate result that truly mattered. Apologizing for his clumsy explanation, Yuma is instantly met with Suda's highly sincere reassurance that his answer was perfectly fine. Frustration viciously bubbles up again as Suda fiercely challenges the ridiculous reasoning. He aggressively reminds the hero that his absolute first priority must be defeating the terrifying Korea. Suda desperately warns them not to add a massive deadweight to the team, emphasizing that the level 11 Korea is a monster that even a bear cannot beat. He angrily questions if Yuma is just trying to blindly win the teacher's approval by pitying a weak Class E student. Shouting in sheer panic, Suda brutally declares he will only be completely miserable if forced to join their elite party. He desperately cries out that he will terribly stand out like a sore thumb among such highly talented individuals. A stunned, heavy silence thoroughly washes over the group as they absorb his frantic and painful outburst. Watching him intently, Kaoru deeply wonders why he would ever express his harsh feelings so openly and desperately. She vividly remembers a time when he used to selfishly and easily say whatever he wanted without any real hesitation. A massive realization crashes into her as she finally accepts that he has genuinely and fundamentally changed. Staring at his frantic form, she bitterly questions if her own stubborn refusal to see his growth is the actual problem. She rapidly reevaluates her entire worldview, wondering if his supposed meddling with Yuma was just a complete and utter misunderstanding. A crushing wave of intense guilt completely washes over Kaoru as she realizes she has been horribly looking down on Suda this entire time. Gripping his weapon tightly, the lone adventurer advances cautiously through the dark and imposing dungeon corridors. Shadows cling to the rugged stone walls as he thoroughly scans the treacherous environment for any hidden threats. The suffocating silence of the cavern amplifies the mounting tension with every careful step he takes forward. Sweat rapidly beads on his brow as heavy, ragged breaths escape his lungs in the claustrophobic darkness. A sudden, terrifying presence catches him completely off guard, tearing a desperate scream from his throat. Instinct takes over as he violently clashes with the unseen monster in a chaotic blur of desperate survival. The brutal skirmish concludes, leaving the utterly exhausted boy standing over the aftermath of the intense battle. Panting heavily, he drops to his knees while desperately trying to recover his rapidly fleeting stamina. A glowing digital notification abruptly materializes in his vision, proudly declaring he has reached level 4. Staring at the floating text, he notes with grim satisfaction that exactly 1 week has passed since he was mysteriously transported. Recalling his strict survival strategy, he firmly resolves to dive solo and intentionally stay far away from the dangerous main objectives. Weighing his current progress, he acknowledges this is a perfectly safe place to stop but feels emboldened by his new level. Fueled by newfound confidence, he boldly decides to push his limits and descend straight down to the perilous 5th floor. The murky atmosphere heavily shifts as he steps cautiously onto the massive and ancient stairwell leading deeper underground. Taking a brief moment to catch his breath, he mentally celebrates the hard-fought achievement of finally reaching level 4. He vividly remembers the game's brutal scaling mechanics, knowing that leveling up becomes drastically harder before hitting this exact milestone. Because of this massive difficulty spike, reaching level 4 is widely considered the absolute bare minimum for professional adventurers with actual jobs. Smirking knowingly, he mentally notes that the punishing difficulty is just the default setting and that Dunex hides several highly abusable prepared gimmicks. Confidently navigating the treacherous 5th floor, he begins actively hunting for those specific game-breaking environmental exploits. Spotting a familiar structural layout in the distance, his eyes widen in pure, unfiltered anticipation. He rapidly approaches a massive wooden structure suspended precariously over a seemingly bottomless chasm. Gazing at the perilous crossing, he instantly recognizes the legendary exploit famously nicknamed the bridge trap. Mentally reciting the strategy, he knows he must first cross the bridge to deliberately draw the intense hatred of a specific wandering orc. The crucial next step demands immense patience, forcing the player to wait precisely until the orc unleashes its signature war cry skill to instantly summon a massive horde of friends. Once the enraged monster pack violently chases him back across the bridge, he must carefully outrun them without getting caught. Reaching ultimate safety on the other side, the final, decisive action is to violently cut the bridge's main support ropes. Sending the entire orc horde plummeting into the abyss perfectly tricks the system into crediting him with a massive, effortless bounty of experience points. Realizing it is getting dangerously late, he decides to merely scout the bridge today while eagerly looking forward to perfectly executing the trap tomorrow. Turning away from the chasm, another incredibly lucky discovery instantly grabs his undivided attention. Grinning widely, he silently admits this secondary, highly excellent gimmick is the true prize he has been aiming for all along. He quickly approaches a highly suspicious, completely unmarked stone wall tucked away in a remote corner of the dungeon. Running his hands across the cold stone, he eagerly searches for the hidden mechanism needed to trigger the anomaly. A colossal, ancient doorway violently materializes from the solid rock, revealing the legendary hidden shortcut known simply as the gate. Mentally calculating the massive time savings, he realizes this shortcut adds 4 extra hours of hunting per trip by magically connecting straight back to the adventurer's school. As an incredibly busy student, he is profoundly grateful for this specific exploit, though a massive lingering doubt suddenly clouds his mind. Staring suspiciously at the completely untouched portal, he begins to feel that something about this incredibly convenient situation is terribly wrong. The creeping paranoia fully sets in as he sharply realizes he has never seen a single other person utilizing this legendary shortcut. Connecting the dots, he remembers that not just this specific gate, but also the infamous slime farming room on the 1st floor was equally deserted. A chilling realization washes over him as he notes that the absolute best hunting spots on the 2nd and 3rd floors were also completely empty. Shaking off the ominous feeling, he happily concludes that these abandoned meta locations are incredibly helpful for a reincarnated player exactly like him. Pushing aside his lingering doubts entirely, he firmly resolves to try and successfully activate the dormant magical gate. Hoping to bypass any complex magical requirements, he lazily decides to rely completely on the system's convenient autocast feature. An intricate, glowing magic circle violently erupts to life right beneath his boots, bathing the dark corridor in blinding light. The heavy stone doors groan loudly as massive waves of magical energy forcibly tear the ancient portal wide open. Staring in pure awe at the swirling vortex, he mutters in sheer disbelief that he actually managed to activate it on his first try. Taking a deep breath, he bravely steps directly into the blinding light of the magical gateway. The surrounding dungeon instantly dissolves into a chaotic, rushing tunnel of pure spatial magic as he is violently transported across vast distances. Solid ground finally forms beneath his boots as the swirling magical vortex quickly dissipates behind him. Blinking away the disorientation, he quickly scans the dimly lit, highly familiar stone architecture of his new surroundings. A wave of immense relief washes over him as he confirms the coordinates he was sent to are exactly the same as in the original game. He perfectly recognizes the dusty basement of the adventurer school, noting that the area is practically empty since it is a designated day off. Planning his escape route, he swiftly decides to sneak quietly home before anyone notices his highly suspicious arrival. His blood violently freezes in his veins as an unexpected voice aggressively demands to know exactly what he is doing down there. A lone figure stands in the quiet aftermath of the magical transport, mentally bracing for the completely unexpected encounter. A stern instructor suddenly approaches from the shadows, aggressively demanding to know what the boy is doing in the basement on a scheduled day off. The harsh, deeply suspicious question echoes loudly through the quiet stone corridor, immediately putting the startled student on full defensive. Panic flares violently internally as he desperately wonders if the teacher is completely unaware of the hidden magical gate. He also frantically considers the terrifying possibility that the instructor simply doubts a weak student could ever reach the perilous 5th floor. Thinking rapidly on his feet, he nervously lies about simply forgetting something on Friday and dropping by on his way home from the dungeon. He desperately piles on another frantic excuse, claiming he meant to leave early but completely lost track of time in the dark caverns. The imposing teacher fiercely stares down at him in absolute silence, deeply weighing the fragile excuses with a heavy, unreadable expression. Breaking the agonizing, suffocating tension, the strict instructor finally accepts the incredibly clumsy lie with a brief, dismissive nod. Turning away smoothly, the teacher simply warns the boy to be careful before departing slowly down the dim hallway. Hearing the heavy footsteps fade away completely, he breathes a massive sigh of raw relief and mentally confirms his darkest suspicion. He realizes with absolute, chilling certainty that the gate remains entirely undiscovered by the public, otherwise the teacher would never have questioned his presence. A creeping, deeply unsettling doubt briefly surfaces, suggesting the instructor might actually know about the shortcut but actively chose to ignore it. Refusing to take any unnecessary lethal risks, he firmly decides to proceed under the absolute assumption that everyone knows about the exploit. Lamenting the deeply lost convenience, he cautiously resolves to take the standard route tomorrow just to remain entirely safe from suspicion. The following day arrives rapidly, dragging him straight back into the perilous and unforgiving depths of the stone dungeon. Standing bravely before the massive chasm, he fiercely hypes himself up to successfully execute the highly legendary bridge trap. He confidently marches straight onto the creaking wooden structure, preparing to perfectly initiate his incredibly dangerous environmental exploit. Kneeling carefully near the thick support ropes, he meticulously checks the bridge's structural integrity before making his final, decisive move. He carefully tests his sharp blade against the heavy fibers, perfectly ensuring he can cleanly sever the tension lines when the exact moment arrives. Suddenly sprinting frantically across the wooden planks, he boldly draws the vicious, bloodthirsty attention of a massive wandering orc. Reaching the far side safely, he exhales sharply and mentally prepares his stance for the massive incoming monstrous horde. Gripping his weapon incredibly tightly, he braces his legs and fiercely declares that the true life-or-death struggle begins right now. He critically analyzes the approaching monsters, noting their sluggish speed but fiercely respecting their absolutely devastating attack power. A sudden, highly agonizing groan violently echoes from the surrounding darkness, completely shattering his intense tactical focus. Whipping his head around in sheer panic, he is absolutely shocked to see a heavily wounded adventurer desperately crawling for immediate help. Rushing over frantically, he tries to aggressively assess the bleeding survivor who incoherently babbles about his fallen friends and burning hatred. The dying man violently grabs his shirt with blood-stained hands, begging desperately for salvation before his rapidly fading strength entirely gives out. Massive, terrifying shadows violently engulf the narrow corridor as the completely enraged orc horde completely surrounds the helpless pair. He stares in absolute, unadulterated horror as the sheer number of towering monsters completely overwhelms his fragile trap strategy. Raw, unfiltered terror violently courses through his veins, causing his entire body to shake uncontrollably before the hulking beasts. A massive, heavily armored orc aggressively raises its heavy club, perfectly preparing to deliver a brutal and definitive killing blow. Desperation violently grips his mind as he realizes his only chance is to somehow aggressively lure even a single monster away from the wounded man. Gritting his teeth fiercely against the sheer terror, He hoists the bleeding adventurer up and frantically yells for him to bear with the pain. Carrying the incredibly heavy burden, he completely abandons his carefully laid plans and violently sprints away from the encroaching horde. The totally enraged orcs roar furiously, immediately giving brutal chase as their heavy footsteps violently shake the ancient stone floor. He aggressively charges straight back toward the wooden bridge, desperately hoping to miraculously use the chasm to his ultimate advantage. Thundering heavily across the precarious planks, he barely manages to stay a single step ahead of the massive, bloodthirsty pursuers. The heavy, completely blinded monsters foolishly storm directly onto the fragile bridge, entirely driven by their relentless and savage fury. Dropping the wounded man safely on the far edge, he violently swings his blade down toward the crucial support ropes with absolute desperation. His eyes widen in sheer, paralyzing shock as the thick ropes violently resist the desperate, slashing impact of his panic strike. The dull blade severely snags on the heavy fibers, completely and utterly failing to sever the massive bridge in a single blow. Roaring with pure, unadulterated adrenaline, he violently yanks the trapped blade free and perfectly prepares for a massive second strike. Channeling every last ounce of his raw strength, he brutally buries the razor edge deep into the final remaining tension line. A deafening, explosive snap violently echoes through the cavern as the massive bridge finally gives way under the immense monstrous weight. The completely enraged orcs roar in absolute, helpless terror as the thick wooden planks entirely collapse beneath their heavy boots. The entire monstrous horde violently plummets into the pitch-black abyss, completely crushed instantly by the lethal fall damage. Collapsing heavily onto the cold stone floor, the utterly exhausted boy desperately gasps for air in the sudden, deafening silence. He stares blankly at his violently trembling hands, completely and utterly traumatized by the razor-thin margin between life and brutal death. The scene sharply transitions to a bustling medical facility where dedicated staff frantically tend to the severely wounded adventurer. From his sterile hospital bed, the deeply grateful survivor weakly asks the busy staff if they can find the chubby boy who miraculously saved him. A guild official solemnly shakes his head, explaining that the mysterious savior had entirely vanished before they could gather an official statement. Meanwhile, the completely traumatized boy walks entirely alone under a heavy downpour, feeling deeply hollowed out by the day's brutal reality. He grimly reviews the devastating news report, learning that out of the 6 injured party members, 2 were officially confirmed dead later. The absolute, soul-crushing weight of sheer mortality violently slams into his mind as he fully processes the brutal reality of actual death. He desperately tries to quickly rationalize that the horrific tragedy was not his fault, yet a massive, suffocating guilt completely consumes his soul. A creeping, terrifying realization deeply sets in as he severely questions if his mere presence triggered a massive, unseen blunder in the world's timeline. Staring blankly ahead into the rain, he violently questions how he ever found any joy in a digital world now filled with agonizing real-world consequences. He brutally chastises his own massive arrogance, fiercely vowing to train flawlessly because death strikes far easier in this reality than he ever anticipated. Stepping quietly into his completely dark home, the violently dripping wet boy silently stands frozen in the heavy, oppressive gloom. A soft, highly concerned voice suddenly calls out from the deep shadows, instantly breaking his incredibly grim spiral of dark thoughts. His little sister Kano steps nervously into the dim hallway, genuinely and deeply asking if her older brother is truly okay. Forcing a weak, highly unconvincing smile, he quietly mutters a hollow assurance to carefully mask his profound inner turmoil. He slowly raises his weary head, desperately trying to construct a calm facade to completely protect his deeply worried sibling. Kano stares perfectly back with massive, sorrowful eyes, entirely unconvinced by his blatantly forced and incredibly fragile attempt at bravery. The fragile mental dam finally bursts, completely overwhelming his emotional defenses as sheer, unfiltered trauma aggressively takes hold of his body. He violently collapses forward, desperately wrapping his arms around his little sister in a frantic, entirely broken search for absolute comfort. Heavy, agonizing tears stream silently down his face as he fiercely buries his head in her shoulder, completely shattered by the dungeon's horrors. His voice violently cracks as he barely manages to weakly whisper her name through the suffocating, heavy sobs racking his chest. Desperation entirely consumes his fractured mind as he shockingly asks if she would illegally accompany him into the highly perilous dungeon. Organizing various cooking ingredients, the quiet domestic routine temporarily masks the underlying tension. A sharp look of utter confusion instantly flashes across Kano's expressive face. Shattering her expectations, Suda boldly proposes using a highly illegal backdoor to secretly enter the dungeon. Kano fiercely questions the massive risks, heavily worried that her older brother will plunge into severe trouble. He bluntly admits that severe and immediate punishment absolutely awaits them if they are caught by the authorities. Shifting his tactical strategy, he firmly argues that gaining preemptive strength is utterly crucial since she aims to attend his academy. He explicitly details a highly valuable skill called fake that feeds opponents completely false combat information. Staring intently into her eyes, he strictly mandates that she absolutely must learn this specific deceptive skill if they dive together. Kano narrows her eyes suspiciously, aggressively pointing out his sudden and massive narrative reversal on dungeon diving. He mentally acknowledges her incredibly sharp intuition, quietly validating her completely reasonable and logical response. Leaning in incredibly seriously, he urgently reminds her of the highly violent altercation that occurred in the library last week. He grimly explains the harsh, unyielding reality that outside students consistently face brutal violence every single year. His voice softens earnestly as he passionately declares his ultimate, unshakable desire for her to successfully defend herself. Kano fully absorbs the incredibly heavy words, deeply contemplating the massive gravity of his highly protective reasoning. A heavy, deeply thoughtful silence completely stretches between the siblings as she carefully weighs the highly dangerous proposal. Overcoming her initial massive anxiety, she enthusiastically and loudly agrees to join the perilous expedition despite the lingering worry. A massive, incredibly radiant smile quickly breaks across her bright face as she fully embraces the incoming dangerous adventure. Watching her highly cheerful reaction, Suda quietly exhales a massive, deep breath of genuine, unfiltered relief. He internally confesses that half of his entire reasoning was a complete lie, yet remains profoundly glad she is so happy. Dark thoughts aggressively consume his mind as he vividly recalls a brutal storyline where countless characters tragically die. He grimly realizes that the Narumi family is originally destined by the game to be nothing more than helpless, slaughtered mob casualties. Cementing his absolute resolve, he fiercely concludes that massively leveling up is a completely non-negotiable necessity for their survival. He mentally clutches his meta-knowledge tightly, highly valuing his completely exclusive foresight regarding the game's brutal future events. A sharp, terrifying wave of caution hits him as he thoroughly acknowledges the massive, lethal risks associated with sharing this hidden truth. His expression completely hardens as unshakable, fierce determination aggressively replaces his former lingering hesitation. He firmly and absolutely vows to cast aside all weakness and reluctance in order to fiercely protect the people he truly loves. Exactly one highly intensive week swiftly passes as the duo aggressively finalizes their massive dungeon preparations. Trudging heavily through incredibly dense foliage, the siblings carefully navigate a deeply secluded and overgrown mountain path. Exhausted by the heavy, brutal trek, Kano loudly whines and desperately asks if they have finally reached their intended destination. Suda calmly redirects her rising frustration, flatly reminding her that he explicitly mentioned crossing the massive mountain. Kano immediately fires back with fierce annoyance, stubbornly denying that he ever gave her that highly specific geographical warning. He logically explains that taking the agonizingly long, hidden route perfectly avoids peers who could easily and dangerously identify her. Peering cautiously over a massive, terrifying drop, they finally behold the true, overwhelming scale of the treacherous dungeon environment. He deeply questions his own incredibly risky choices, silently wondering if exposing her to this literal life-or-death secret is truly okay. Kano stares perfectly back with absolute, unshakable trust, entirely oblivious to his intense, highly conflicting internal turmoil. They step incredibly carefully into the deep, echoing underground cavern, instantly greeted by the massive, suspended wooden bridge. The highly precarious trap looms silently in the pitch-black darkness, perfectly set for their highly dangerous, world-breaking exploit. Gripping his heavy weapon incredibly tightly, Suda mentally prepares to perfectly execute the terrifying monstrous bait tactic. He fiercely and aggressively orders Kano not to chicken out as he boldly prepares to personally lure the massive orc horde. Reaffirming her absolutely critical role, Kano confidently verifies that her only job is to precisely and perfectly sever the main support string. She softly wishes him absolute good luck, mentally flashing back to their highly grueling week of intense, non-stop weapon testing. They ruthlessly tested various massive lethal instruments, ranging from heavy swords to highly destructive, explosive hand grenades. Ultimately, Kano armed herself with a massive, razor-sharp machete while Suda ironically opted for incredibly heavy-duty scissors. A sudden, highly terrifying roar violently shakes the ancient, crumbling cavern walls as the massive trap officially springs to life. The deafening rhythmic thunder of heavy boots aggressively signals the massive, incredibly bloodthirsty orc charge rushing toward them. Sprinting frantically across the violently trembling bridge, Suda completely screams at Kano to execute the final, absolute cut. Gripping the incredibly heavy machete, Kano fiercely prepares to deliver the single, decisive, trap-springing blow. She brutally and flawlessly slams the massive blade down directly onto the thick, highly tensioned main support rope. The razor-sharp, heavy steel aggressively bites incredibly deep into the thick, heavily strained fibers of the vital rope. A terrifying, incredibly high-pitched creak violently echoes as the massive rope desperately and hopelessly struggles to hold on. The final, tearing fibers completely violently give way, instantly and perfectly snapping the highly critical tension line. The massive, ancient wooden bridge catastrophically collapses, violently tearing entirely away from the jagged cavern walls. The completely enraged, heavily armored orc horde plummets entirely helplessly into the pitch-black, infinitely bottomless abyss. A massive, choking cloud of dust violently kicks up as the completely destroyed bridge dangles utterly uselessly over the dark void. Suda collapses incredibly heavily onto the cold stone, utterly and completely exhausted from the highly intense, life-threatening sprint. Rushing over highly frantically, Kano tearfully and highly desperately apologizes to her completely breathless and grounded brother. He quickly dismisses her massive, deep panic, proudly revealing his arm is completely shielded by a highly expensive, defensive demon wolf pelt. Flipping the entire script, he gently apologizes instead for forcefully dragging her into such a highly terrifying, incredibly intense first-time experience. Kano stares completely quietly at her brother, deeply moved by his incredibly protective, highly reassuring and entirely selfless demeanor. She suddenly winces in incredibly sharp pain, prompting Suda to calmly explain she is simply experiencing the highly expected leveling symptoms. Overwhelmed by the massive, rushing power surge, she loudly marvels that she feels like she instantly jumped 5 entire levels. Suda's jaw violently drops in complete, utter shock as he realizes she completely absorbed a massive, game-breaking bounty of experience points. Pure panic briefly flashes as a glowing system prompt aggressively asks Kano to immediately undergo a massive, permanent job change. He violently and aggressively shouts for her to stop, absolutely forbidding her from carelessly and instantly accepting the digital prompt. He frantically explains that the completely quirkless starting class secretly holds immense, highly abusable hidden potential for the future. He passionately reveals that aggressively training the newbie class permanently expands a player's absolute skill slots by exactly 3. He intensely stresses that completely missing this crucial early advantage hits exactly like a devastating, incredibly painful punch in the gut later on. Kano tilts her head in complete, deep confusion, entirely baffled by his incredibly weird, highly specific and utterly bizarre physical analogy. Meanwhile, the heroic party completely excitedly celebrates finally reaching level 5 and aggressively locking in their advanced, specialized jobs. With exactly 1 crucial week left until the brutal, highly anticipated showdown, the fiercely determined heroes completely finalize their ultimate combat classes. A quiet moment of reflection sets in as the siblings walk together under the clear sky. The peaceful atmosphere persists as they continue their calm stroll directly away from the dungeon. Breaking the comfortable silence, Suda sternly warns Kano to absolutely never tell anyone about the bridge trap. He stares ahead highly seriously, mentally calculating the severe, lethal risks of their newly discovered exploit leaking out. He carefully rationalizes that it would be a massive shame if others stole their hunting spot or if dangerous thugs violently threatened her for the hidden information. Kano easily nods in immediate agreement, completely accepting his highly logical and deeply protective reasoning. A brief, somewhat awkward pause heavily stretches between the two as they walk down the quiet street. Hesitating slightly, Suda awkwardly begins to explain exactly how he inexplicably knew about that highly secret location. He anxiously looks at her, directly asking if his highly suspicious and seemingly unexplainable knowledge actually bothers her. Kano tilts her head thoughtfully, seemingly pondering the strange, unexpected question for a brief moment. She casually brushes off his massive concern, claiming she assumed he just found it by chance, while Suda secretly notes her bizarrely immense trust in him. He vividly recalls her completely cowardly and highly timid behavior during the brutal library incident just days prior. He deeply analyzes her strange mental priorities, keenly noticing how she seamlessly completely replaces her fears with absolute faith. A creeping sensation heavily settles in his gut as he admits that something about her unquestioning nature feels completely off. He silently wonders if he can truly trust her, ultimately concluding that her blunt attitude feels far too frank to be a calculated act. The scene violently shifts to an intense sparring match as a heavy wooden blade aggressively strikes a solid blocking stance. Rapid movements violently blur through the busy training ground as the grueling combat practice continues at a breakneck pace. A fierce, sweeping strike is swiftly executed, perfectly testing the absolute limits of the combatant's fast reflexes. Yuma sharply exhales as he successfully deflects the massive blow with incredible, practiced precision. Lowering his heavy wooden weapon, the talented swordsman confidently remarks that he is finally starting to get a true feel for sword fights. Turning directly to his fierce training partner, he genuinely thanks Kair for intensely helping him improve his raw combat skills. Kair pauses briefly, her wooden weapon resting easily at her side as she gently catches her breath. She humbly brushes off the massive praise, casually claiming she was merely perfectly copying Korea's official battle record. Yuma firmly holds his ground, warmly reaffirming his deep, unshakable gratitude for her dedicated and highly effective assistance. A heavy, deeply serious silence completely envelopes the training ground as the friendly atmosphere rapidly dissipates. Staring intently at the hero, Kair softly calls out Yuma's name to instantly command his absolute, undivided attention. She cuts straight to the core issue, bluntly asking if he truly believes he can actually win against the monstrous Korea. Yuma gazes downward with a deeply serious expression, preparing to deliver a highly honest assessment of his current strength. Refusing to confidently lie to his reliable partner, he bluntly admits that he simply does not know. The harsh, undeniable reality of their massive power gap hangs incredibly heavily in the quiet air. Kair heavily reminds him that his growth violently stalled at level 4, making his actual winning chances incredibly low. She gently suggests that actively withdrawing from the brutal duel might be a perfectly valid and highly logical option. Yuma instantly rejects the cowardly idea, fiercely declaring that completely withdrawing is absolutely impossible for him. He passionately explains that Class E is already massively looked down upon in both overall level and combat experience compared to Class D. Gripping his weapon incredibly tightly, he points out that he miraculously secured a rare chance to completely overthrow the tyrannical hierarchy. His eyes burn with unyielding resolve as he firmly states that backing down now guarantees absolutely nothing will ever change. He bitterly adds that fleeing the highly anticipated duel would only hand their cruel oppressors another free excuse to brand them completely cowards. Standing tall with absolute, unshakable conviction, the brave hero fiercely vows that he is absolutely not going to lose. The grueling physical training immediately aggressively resumes, pushing the young swordsman far past his absolute physical limits. Yuma pants incredibly heavily, struggling desperately to catch his breath under the massive, crushing weight of sheer physical exhaustion. Sweat violently pours down his determined face as he stubbornly refuses to collapse from the intense, punishing physical strain. A massive price tag of 250,000 yen abruptly flashes, perfectly symbolizing the incredibly steep financial cost of their vital battle preparations. The high-speed training montage rapidly accelerates as weapons clash violently in the dimly lit environment. Every single agonizing swing is meticulously calculated to perfectly maximize combat efficiency against their highly impending threat. Yuma aggressively charges forward, fiercely testing his newly acquired reflexes against highly rapid, completely unpredictable strikes. The relentless, highly punishing combat drills push his bruised body directly to the absolute breaking point. He swiftly dodges a lethal attack, effectively proving his raw agility has massively improved through sheer, unfiltered determination. A powerful, decisive counterstrike perfectly connects, violently echoing through the completely silent training ground. Exhaustion threatens to completely overtake him, yet his absolute dedication fiercely forces his burning muscles to keep moving. The brutal training perfectly transitions into a tense, highly atmospheric urban setting under the dark, glowing evening sky. Narumi abruptly shouts Kaeru's name from across the busy street, violently shattering her quiet concentration. Kaeru jolts in sheer surprise, her sudden, panicked flinch causing a small device to heavily slip from her hands. Staring blankly ahead, she quietly notes the vibrant red traffic light dictating their immediate, busy urban surroundings. She slowly recovers from the completely unexpected scare, softly exhaling to aggressively steady her rapidly racing heartbeat. Narumi awkwardly rubs the back of his neck, heavily apologizing for startling her so abruptly at the pedestrian crosswalk. Getting straight to the main point, he curiously asks for a highly specific update regarding Akaji's current combat progress. He deeply presses for vital details, actively wondering how the heroic swordsman is truly holding up under the immense pressure. Kaeru completely dismisses any concern, proudly revealing that Yuma's massive motivation perfectly propelled them to level 6 in just one single month. Despite the highly impressive growth, Narumi privately grimaces, completely aware that defeating the monster will still be incredibly hard. He stares blankly at the cold ground, heavily running complex mental simulations of the impending, highly brutal boss battle. He grimly reflects that Korea's infamous duel event is widely known as a massive, unavoidable death trap for completely unaware first-timers. Knowing the absolute truth of the hidden game mechanics, he realizes that simply leveling up is fundamentally useless for securing a guaranteed victory. He mentally calculates that a level 6 combatant absolutely requires at least one highly special weapon to even survive the brutal encounter. Complete desperation slowly begins to heavily creep into his mind as he frantically searches for a massive tactical advantage. He violently scans his available inventory and current meta-knowledge base, actively hunting for a completely hidden narrative loophole. A faint spark of deep inspiration suddenly flashes as he pieces together highly disjointed bits of crucial game knowledge. The fragmented strategies rapidly align perfectly in his mind, seamlessly forming a massive, highly risky combat plan. He aggressively narrows his eyes, actively locking onto the exact, highly specific item absolutely needed to turn the lethal tides. Rejecting his previous deep despair, a powerful wave of sheer optimism completely washes over his previously terrified mind. A massive, incredibly confident smile breaks across his face as he excitedly concludes that this entirely impossible situation might actually work out after all.